Welcome, welcome, welcome. Take your seats, get comfy. We are about to go on another little journey through history as we dip our toes back into World War One. Hello, old friend. We've been here before. And we've got to talk about this a couple different episodes. So we did the overview on World War One. We got to talk about the Battle of the Somme. This actually occurs prior to and also during the Battle of the Somme, almost causing the Battle of the Somme to occur. It was already in play, but I think this may have accelerated the need for the Battle of the Somme to kick off.
Well, yeah, this kind of shapes the Battle of the Somme from being a French-led offensive into a British-led offensive.
This explains why the French were not able to man enough people to be the leading force in the Battle of the Somme.
There were sister battles. These two kind of are synonymous with each other because they took place at the same time, and then to a lesser extent, the Brusilov offensive that happens in Russia during this time too. But they're both situated in France, and they were both a response to the end of 1915. The end of 1915, the way that it kind of sits is you have, and we'll talk about Champagne and Artois, but at the end of 1915, the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia, has seen a lot of losses up to this point in time.
What's Italy doing at this point?
Italy's kind of hanging out on our side. We'll talk about Sun-Tzu a little bit in their attempts to fight off the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
When are we going to change this to the Quattro Entente? Like, quiet down, Italy.
Win a battle first.
Quit fighting against the same fucking army 12 different times.
Maybe do a little advancing or lose some ground. We'll throw you in if you lose some ground, too.
It's like a lawyer at the law firm that wants their name on the actual, like, as a partner. Win a case. Battle of Verdun. So kind of on the hierarchy of World War I battles, it's kind of the Somme and Verdun, and it really depends on what you're more into. Do you like the meat grinding trench warfare aspect of the Somme, where hardly any ground was taken and an extremely high number of people were needlessly killed? Or do you like the Battle of Verdun, where it's more of a city siege type thing? There are two different types of warfare.
And you run into a situation where the Somme being the bloodiest war of World War I and Verdun being the longest battle. The longest battle, or the bloodiest battle for the Somme and the longest battle for Verdun.
Yes.
Which Verdun still has a ton of casualties. At the same time, they just come in different ways. It seems like during the Somme, there wasn't just mass death every single day, but people were getting shot. Verdun was a little bit more of, okay, we have this, let's kind of figure out where we want to go next. And we're not going to talk about every day of fighting in Verdun because it's 302 days long or something like that.
Yeah. And I think the difference is one is more urban and like more urban combat. And one is just the thing with the Somme is we're just out in a field.
Yeah.
Kind of. And we're just fighting to push you back further onto your field than on our field. Verdun is like, the Germans are coming in. We're going to take your forts. We're going to take this city. And so you have entrenched positions that are already established, which to me, the fact that you're going against forts and things like that, that's what like ancient warfare was.
Oh, yeah.
And this is almost one of the, if not the last major instance of like forts, like static fortresses and defenses and everything, even being a thing in warfare. And it comes into play with the type of artillery that's going to be used, what actually kind of makes those obsolete going forward in warfare.
The major killer in Somme, I believe, was probably machine guns, you would say. It just mowing people down as they come out of trenches along the fronts. Whereas here, I think it's more, we're lobbing artillery as much as possible.
I think they said overall, and I think it might have been an overall World War I statistic, that 75% of the casualties of World War I came from artillery.
Oh, God.
Because again, it's one of those things where, and I know we're already getting into the weeds, but we'll hit the music in a second. When we've talked about this I know we keep going back to the Somme, but they're intrinsically tied into this.
Oh, yeah.
So we talked about the Somme of being this new type of warfare. Machine guns, I know, weren't a brand new thing, but they're the amount in which they were deployed at this point was a new thing. And then the type of artillery that was being used was kind of a new thing. And so you have commanders that have no idea how to fight this type of warfare, going off previous era's tactics, that it's just like, oh yeah, put guys on horses and just like rush them in there. Well, machine guns still take down horses and artillery still takes down horses. And there's a learning curve to figure out like, oh, the shit we used to do doesn't work against these types of weapons.
Turns out pitched battles aren't exactly the end-all be-all.
Yeah, no one's marching out with a flute and a drummer and everything like that and just taking shots at each other. All right. Well, before we get too far into it with the Battle of Verdun, remember, we got the Patreon out now, patreon.com/historicallyhigh. We're going to be launching all types of bonus content. Our main thing is going to be smaller episodes for stuff that we can't cover on here because there's just not enough information. But we're also doing just some like fun little tidbits on like game show-esque stuff with history, little snippets of history that people have always maybe had questions about or just kind of wondered, little fun stuff. So there's going to be continuous content coming out on there. So get yourself signed up.
Instead of talking to your friends at work about battles like Verdun or bloody messes, you can go in there with little extra tidbits of like Muppet movies.
Yeah, don't freak someone out with something so intense. Be like, do you know how many people died at Verdun? You can be like, hey, how many Muppet movies do you think were actually made during this time period? All right. And then also wherever you listen to your podcast, 5-star rating wherever you guys can spare it. And then also keep the comments coming for episode recommendations. And we'll keep cranking these things out for you guys. Got anything else?
Let's Verdun this thing.
I'm not even going to knock that pun. That was good.
I hate myself for doing it, but I felt
we done Verdun it?
We're about to Verdun it. Like we were kind of leaning into, the end of 1915 saw the chief of the German Great General Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, EVF. He saw the fall offensive of the French pushing into the Second Battle of Champagne and the Third Battle of Artois, successfully repelled by the German army. And the number of casualties on the Triple Entente side was pretty rough through 1914 and 15. The numbers are stacking up in the millions for the French at this point in time. And that's kind of where this Western Front sits.
They're bearing the brunt of it. At this point, kind of how we talk about with World War II, there is a section of these wars where it is just kind of all falling on one country as far as the attack and the defense goes, while the other ones kind of are like, hey, sorry this is happening to you, but we're going to use this time to build up our strength, and then we can come in and try to help you. And France is kind of taken in the teeth for the early parts of World War I.
They're the one with the rowdy neighbor. They have the rowdiest neighbor that comes out of the world.
Yes.
Germany is this powerhouse that's itching to figure themselves out on the pecking order of Europe. And they know that France has the largest standing army in Europe.
Yeah.
They know that Russia has 1 trillion people that they can throw in and do this kind of thing. And this is at a point in time where Russia's sort of in flux because we're moving away from
Tsarist Russia into the Bolsheviks and stuff like that.
Into a different frame. And then you have the British Navy that just kind of rules the seas and is probably top of the pecking order.
Listen, we can help you guys out. Are you fighting on water?
Yeah.
We can help you guys out if you're fighting on land. Okay. We usually don't do that, especially fighting we're used to fighting against the French all the time, but we're going to have to wrap our heads around this fighting with the French thing.
Great news for France is that we're pretty comfortable fighting on French soil.
Exactly.
We've done this a lot against them.
You guys may land your troops at we know where to land our troops. We've been landing troops in France for a long time, please.
You think the British got off the ships and they just started pointing guns at the French and they're like, whoa, same side this time.
Hey, do you know if this place is still open in this town? My grandfather told me about it.
We know all these bars, all these brothels in France pretty well, like the backs of our hands. his plans for the 1916 offensive were a little bit muddled because he realized something at this time where this Central Alliance just wasn't quite as strong as they had hoped. Going into 1916, you had the Austro-Hungarian Empire that's failing pretty fast. You also have a British blockade on Germany that's starting to cripple the Germans at home. The grain harvests are coming in lower at home, so not only are you not able to bring things in, you're also not able to provide off of your land for the people back at home.
Is it fair to say, well, it's probably not fair to say, that Austria-Hungary is kind of like to Germany during World War I, how Italy is to Germany in World War II?
I think the Ottomans and Austria-Hungary were two very low tires on the tricycle.
Yeah.
And Germany was, I mean, they were good. They had the fighting power, they had the manpower. They, as we've talked about numerous times in World War I, Germany was on the come up before they started getting a little too big for their britches.
We never covered it during the rise of the Nazi Party episode, but that had to be a talking point, right? Like, we didn't lose this war because of Germany. We lost this war because of an inferior partnership with an ally that couldn't carry their weight.
We were fighting 3-1,
And
4-1.
they dragged
sometimes.
us down. We would have won it had we just been fighting on our own, possibly.
And it comes down to manpower when you look at it. Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire weren't great, but they were also bodies on a field that could maintain a battle up for a long enough time for maybe Germany to come in and reinforce.
That's the other thing that like they touch a lot on during World War I is wars at this point were never these real long things. Yeah, you have the 100-year war, you have the 7 Years' War, but with those types of wars, it was fight, long period of time between.
We'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Longer than that. We got to sail across the ocean to resupply our shit. We'll see you guys back here in the spring or whatever. With World War I, people were just like, oh, this thing's going to be over relatively quickly. So Germany's like, this thing will be wrapped up within a year, maybe 2 years max. And it's getting to a point, especially when we're coming up to 1916, when this is all going to go down. It's a stalemate in a lot of places on a lot of different fronts. You have the Western Front, which had solidified into like a 400-mile line of trenches stretching from Switzerland to the North Sea. So from Switzerland all the way up to the ocean, through Belgium, through the Benelux countries and everything like that. You then had the front that was between Germany and Russia, that I think they had progressed pretty decently into Russia, but they're running into the exact same thing that you always run into with an invasion of Russia: supply issues, weather, and the fact that there's seemingly an endless supply of people that they're going to throw at you from that country.
An endless supply of people, and how far do you chase a retreat?
Yeah.
How can you chase a retreat 600 miles that they have behind them?
Yeah.
There's just no way to be able to create a line to be able to support an attack that deep into a country that fast.
And then what's going on down kind of more south with Italy and the, was it the Ottomans or Austria-Hungary that they were against, or kind of both? Were they the same thing?
I think it was a little bit of both, but the Ottomans were just a dying empire. They crapped out so soon.
And then the Italians were tied up in regards to that. So Germany's not going to look at that and say, is that really, really, where we want to pool our resources and try to make a push? Is that going to do us any good against Russia or against France? No.
Well, there wasn't even Italy. It was the Kingdom of Italy. They hadn't even come together yet.
So you kind of have limited options for what you're trying to plan as far as offensives going into, 1916.
And Falkenhayn's thoughts start drifting towards the military capital of France. He starts to look at an area that may be a little bit fat, which it's weird to say that the military capital of France was a little bit fat and maybe ripe. But the reason that it was because Verdun wasn't a hot part of the battle. It also had some very strategic positions around it with the Meuse Heights that you didn't necessarily have to focus on taking the city of Verdun as much as you had to focus on taking the heights.
And the Battle of Verdun is this all-encompassing thing for the longest ongoing battle of World War One. So when you say like Battle of the Somme, Battle of Verdun, it's not like this is a 2-week engagement and someone was declared, the definitive winner. Battle of Verdun goes from February 21st of 1916 all the way to December of 1916. So 10 months that this thing rages on, and it's pretty constant fighting the entire time. Now, geographically, Verdun, located in France, it's on the Western Front. It's actually located more in northeastern France, closer up to the border with like the Benelux countries of Belgium. Because just like in World War II, that's where Germany was like, hey, where do you think we should attack France from? Well, obviously, we're going to attack them directly on the border where they're expecting us to attack them, right? Or we can just go up and around Belgium, who's much easier to move through, and then we just pour into the north of France.
Much easier, much quicker. It's not a direct engagement with France. Mm-hmm. We're going to have a little bit of, we're going to have a preseason game against Belgium before we enter France.
We're going to get to test out some new toys.
And much different from World War II, where you look at it and France just kind of fell in a matter of 60 days. It's still France fighting and losing a bunch of its troops, but they don't penetrate into France like they do in World War II.
They don't get full pennied like they did, yeah.
This isn't France up against the English Channel and up against the water trying to push back and just protect the ports.
Yeah.
This is more, as Chris said, central northeastern France, where there is some room to run, but also if you're talking about getting troops in from Britain, it's going to take a little bit longer. And Britain had also kind of dipped their toe in there. And the way that von Falkenhayn looked at this whole entire thing was he didn't see France as the main enemy. Kind of the way that he was looking at the battlefields, you have an Eastern Front in Russia that Paul von Hindenburg, PVF, the asshole that goes ahead and lets Hitler into the chancellery. And you also have Ludendorff, Erich Ludendorff, who I believe was the sidekick of Hitler.
He was
the same guy?
I always look at Ludendorff as like the spokesperson. Like it's a shitty company, but we need to find someone that people trust. Like he's the fucking Billy Mays of the Nazi Party.
Yeah, so you have those two guys who have won some pretty decisive battles in Russia on the Eastern Front that are sitting there tugging on Falkenhayn's jacket saying, hey, let's keep attacking in the East. Falkenhayn, to his credit, looks at that and he says, well, if they retreat, how are we going to chase them?
Why?
Yeah. It also gets super duper cold. So if we're going to launch an offensive, we're going to have to launch it further into 1916.
Do you think part of that's also like looking at what territory that you could conquer and which one you would prefer personally to conquer? And you're like, yeah, but like you said, we're just going to keep going east. What are we getting out of this? Like, sure, they have a ton of natural resources, but guys, France is cool. Mm-hmm. We need to take more of that.
Well, and also France is just more of a power in Europe.
Yes, so, there's more prestige in beating France.
But France isn't even the ultimate goal. France is the stepping stone to knowing, all right, if we can take down France, if we can talk them into an armistice or whatever, our main goal is to go after Britain.
Yeah.
Britain's the crown jewel of Europe because in order to get to Britain, they just pull back across the water and can sit there and defend their island. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a lot harder to get to Britain than it is to France.
It's the same strategy of the fact that Britain is only technically dangerous if they have the ability to land and consolidate power on mainland Europe. The only way they can do that right now is with France.
Yeah.
France is allowing them the ability to land on French soil that's uncontested, build up their strength, and then they can attack us. They can't attack us with just their ships. If we don't give them a place to set up shop, we pull back a couple miles from the shore, and England is kind of neutered at that point because we're not going to go pick a fight with their navy. Or we then co-opt the French Navy and whoever else we cancel or not cancel. Oh my God, why is the word escaping me? Conquer. We just take their navies, and then we have like a large armada that we can launch against the English, and then do our version of Operation Sea Lion or whatever the fuck you want to call it, and try to invade England. But didn't he say something like France was the sword of Britain?
Something very similar to those words.
I'm going to knock the sword out of their hand.
Yeah, they can't come get us if they don't have a foothold in mainland Europe.
Yeah.
We also can't go get them because we can't get to their island because of their navy.
Yeah.
So they have to recognize us as an equal, basically, in the way that Europe works. This is where things get interesting with Falkenhayn, and obviously hindsight is 2020. Falkenhayn, being the man that he was, definitely took some artistic liberties with his desire for France. So there's like one area where this information comes out, and this area, or this piece of information, has been used as kind of what Van Falkenhayn's thought process was. He writes in his journals that he wrote to Chancellor?
Yeah, it would have been Chancellor.
Or the king.
Kaiser.
Basically. Kaiser, yes. That's the word, emperor. He writes that he wrote him letters saying that he wanted to bleed the French white.
Kaiser comes from Caesar, right?
Yes,
Yep.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, he writes that he wrote these letters saying that he wanted to bleed the French white. And he talks about how he wants this to be a war of attrition. He wants to try to grind down the French and take away all of their manpower resources down in Verdun. The problem with that is, based upon his strategy and based upon the fact that there's no other written understanding that this was his plan, that there's a good chance he looked at his strategy and realized, well, this is going to sound stupid if I write this down. So if I write that I wanted this to be a war of attrition, it's going to make me look a lot better.
I need someone to come up with a better word than just kill as many of their people as I possibly can.
And bleeding the French white sounds like a cool war thing.
So with Verdun itself, from kind of that symbolism perspective, this was an ancient city that had origins dating back to the Romans. It was Verdun itself was like a fortified city, but then also the area of Verdun. So Verdun applies to both the area, but then also the city, that's kind of at the center of it. It had these two almost like rings of forts or defensive fortifications completely around the city. So just kind of in staggered, and they all were placed in strategic, vantage points all around this entire area, to where they could also be close enough to mutually fire upon and support each other. If one fort was getting attacked, it doesn't do a lot of good if that can't be supported by another fort, because then you just launch a bulk of your forces against that one, you take it, and then you just hit each fort individually. If they can support each other, then you're fighting against three forts when you're really just trying to attack one.
Well, the crazy thing that I always think about this is the Meuse River basically runs right into Verdun. It splits the battlefield into the east on the right and the west on the left. But most of these forts are on raised ground. They're in this area called the Meuse Heights.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because if you think that you're down in Verdun when this fighting is going on, and you're just seeing shots from artillery lobbed up and over your town, over your city, to try to hit these forts on the heights on the other side. Mm-hmm. So and eventually they do finally evacuate the city, but for a while the West Bank is trying to protect the East Bank, they're just lobbing artillery up and over the top of you.
So I rabbit holed looking into just like strategic importance for certain things. Mm-hmm. So the reason that these forts are, of course, placed on these heights, they do have like artillery batteries and things like that can fire. The reason that these things are so sought after by the Germans is for the strategic importance that having the high ground does. But they wanted to use this also as a vantage point, because spotting your artillery was the name of the game in World War I. This is why aircraft were essentially put into the air. It wasn't to fight other aircraft. It was to be able to spot the fall of artillery, to go ahead and relay enemy positions, and help dial in what was the main mode of warfare, which was bombardment, mm-hmm. and be able to say, hey, it's this section that they're, massing in. You need to train all of the guns on this area. So if you're standing up on a hill and you have all your guns behind you over another hill, protected where they can't be seen, you can just basically be like, okay, you guys go ahead and fire off a shot. You see it come down, you see him land. You're like, you guys are going to dial it in, another half mile forward. So having those areas is extremely important to be able to either proceed with an advance or to stop someone trying to advance on you.
And the other alternative to that, besides an airplane, is to just launch balloons.
Yeah.
Just have spotting balloons that are floating up in the air that can be seen by the other side.
They're huge.
Yeah, and you're just trying to spot these vantage points. So it's going to be far more beneficial to take the heights and be able to spot it than send two guys up in a balloon.
Tiny little rickety basket, if even that. Do you think at some point they had makeshift balloons where they were just like strapping a guy up and tying him to the balloon? Be like, okay, we're going to send you up. And then you're going to need to write down and report back down to us. Remember, because planes used to drop little notes.
Yeah.
I wonder if the guy just had a satchel full of paper and little things that he could drop down, tie rocks to him, and just basically be like, okay, I'm seeing this. And he just drops it down to the guy below him.
It's like at the fair, those seats that you sit in and it spins you around.
Uh-huh.
It's just one guy in a metal seat that's tied up to the balloon.
The wind is just taking him in a large circle around.
I got to wait till I come back around to spot. Right there. That's the one. I'm going to drop it.
Okay. So German goal, bleed France white. And how they're going to do that is they are going to capture the Meuse Heights, excellent defensive positions that they can then reestablish with also observation for artillery fire on Verdun itself, the fortress city. After they're captured, the French would have to commit any of their strategic reserves to have to be pushed up to then try to recapture defensive positions, which if an army is trying to recapture a defensive position, they're going to have a lot more casualties. So in a roundabout way, he's like, we're going to capture positions that then they're going to be forced to throw meat against repeatedly trying to take them back, and we're just going to knock out a shit ton of their guys.
That's what he's saying at this point. That's what his diaries are showing.
Yes.
I believe that that's part of his strategy. But at the same time, he also has this idea that he doesn't want total war.
Correct.
He doesn't want to put everything into doing this. He just wants a few. And if you're trying to bleed somebody white, you're going to send in the cavalry, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is going to be focused on trying to kill all of them. But he doesn't want to send in all of his troops. He doesn't want a full engagement. He just kind of wants to be able to bombard them with as much artillery as humanly possible. And to his credit, the beginnings of the way that their artillery fired that we'll talk about later, pretty brilliant. You're going to basically have your heavy guns and your light guns. Your light guns are going to move up while your heavy guns are firing. Mm-hmm. They're going to get into position. Your light guns are going to be firing while you're moving up your heavy artillery to get it closer. So it's kind of like you're leapfrogging each other to get to these certain areas.
And von Falkenhayn has a really beneficial position that he's in, especially with Verdun, because at this point, there's a term they use, it's called a salient. A salient is just a bulge. So during the Battle of the Bulge, there's just a big bulge that goes out. It's not a straight line. It bulges out into the enemy. They're pushing back, but there's a strong defensive position that's essentially preventing them from pushing forward. So with Verdun, that's exactly what you get. If you take a horseshoe and you were to kind of angle it, instead of being the opening for the horseshoe would face more in I guess you would say a southwestern direction. Mm-hmm. So Verdun is basically in this big horseshoe that due to the forts and due to the terrain, the Germans have not been able to push that section to match up with the line on the north and east side of it.
Verdun's kind of a pimple.
Correct, but that also allows you the option to be like, well, usually in warfare, we can just attack from one direction. We got to try to push them back. We have the advantage of being able to attack this place from 3 different directions, north, east, and then also kind of a little bit to the south.
And that's not a bad position to be in.
It's position A.
Yeah. The problem is in this salient, as Chris was talking about with these forts, these aren't your run-of-the-mill forts. these forts are pretty damn cool. And probably the biggest one that we're going to talk about is called Fort Douaumont. Fort Douaumont experienced a retrofit. I believe it was the latest one that they had done was in 1903.
I love how they say it's like it was modernized.
Yeah. In 1903, it was modernized to whatever was going on in 1903. But surprisingly, the way that these forts were built was they weren't these giant fortresses on a hill that were easy to spot.
It's not what you picture when someone says a fort.
Yeah.
It's not these giant, thick walls. It's not the city of Troy or anything like that. You're basically taking these hills and you're like, okay, let's use the natural landscape. What we're going to do is basically use the bedrock and the formation of the hill is we're just going to turn the top of the hill into the fort. And we're going to dig down into it. We're going to put gun emplacements that will just be a little bit above the ground. And because it's on the hill, it can just fire down. It doesn't have to worry about anything obstructing in front of it. And man, the technology I didn't know that they had this.
No.
So Fort Douaumont, I'm trying to think of the shape. It's a pentagon, technically, but a little bit of not misshapen, but elongated version of it on this piece of raised ground. And then it's basically cut into the bedrock where it's almost sliced like bread. And then they have gun emplacements that can cover from those straight portions of the cliff face, if you will. And then up above it on top, you don't have a raised fort with walls or anything like that. You have gun emplacements that can literally be raised out of the ground, fired, and then lowered back into the ground when the enemy wants to start shelling you, so they can't really knock out your guns that easily.
They're not blowing out walls. There's not something that they can really focus on to try to aim and bombard.
You're not trying. There's not a silhouetted form against the backdrop that you're like, well, there's obviously a fortress right there. Fire on it. You're just trying to lob stuff and hit the top of this hill.
Yeah, you have these areas that you can have this heavy artillery that's raised and lowered. And interestingly enough, they had to go through and actually fit the guns and cut the barrels down for them to be able to drop them back down into the holes. So their long-range trajectory wasn't going to be as accurate, but these sort of snub-nosed heavy artillery guns can be raised, and if they're close enough, you don't got to be that accurate.
No, and the entire area, so the top of the hill was completely bare, and then the area all around the fort was bare, so there's like this uncovered, unobstructed land where you still have to approach the fort. So while you have the larger guns that are able to hit targets a little bit further, hit artillery, things like that, you then have the fort being defended by smaller machine gun emplacements that are built within the rock, and everything is built underground. There's tunnels connecting the barracks and tunnels connecting all these different positions to where no one on the French side has to come above ground to actually inhabit or, take up any of these positions that are within this fort. So you try to approach it with infantry. There's machine guns and smaller stuff to go ahead and drive those guys off. You try to approach it with anything else. There's the larger artillery that's going to be able to hit you too.
Well, and then there's also the slowing tactic of basically having a thicket of barbed wire, just basically in a crown on top of these mountains. Mm-hmm. So as far as forts go, I feel like that's one of the more confident forts that I would want to be in.
Yes.
Because you're underground, you're not providing a target to be hit at, and at the same time, there's a lot of little surprises that you can spring on anybody that's trying to come up onto you. To the west, there's less heights, and it becomes more of a hilly area. Two of the hills that we're going to talk about, they're either called côtes, which I believe is hill in French, or we're just going to call them hill. There's this Côte 304, this hill 304, that, again, it's when they finally gas out in the east and have to go to the west, you're going to see fighting over hills for this high ground. Mm-hmm. It's the same strategy, except for you're not going for forts.
And like Hill 304 is called 304 because the hill was 304 meters tall. So you're not getting super clever names, but this hill is part of a small collection of them that ends up becoming Monthomme or something like that, which is basically called Dead Man's Hill. So that's going to give you a little bit of an indication for how much fighting is going to take place over this area.
Yeah. Monthomme is actually, it was named prior to World War I, in probably the most common sense way possible. They climbed the top of the hill and they found a dead guy on top of the hill. So they just named it Dead Man's Hill. But
That's better than the alternative, because if you were like, where are we being stationed at? We're being stationed at Dead Man's Hill. You're like, what the fuck? Like, no, it's cool. They found like a dead guy up there. That's why it's called that. It's not because a whole bunch of people die up there yet.
6 months in, Dead Man's Hill is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, people are going to know it for a different reason.
The way that the French treated this area in Verdun is disrespectful. There's this man named General Joffre that we're going to talk about. He was the chief of staff for the army, Joseph Joffre, for France, and he basically treated Verdun like a bank. He had areas of fighting that were going on that were hot, and they needed more artillery, they needed more men. So you have Joffre basically just liquidating most of the defenses in Verdun because it was a cooler battlefield. It was a cooler area.
It's an ammo dump to him.
Pretty much, yeah. So while you do have the benefit of these forts to be able to protect them, in a lot of these forts, it's just literally like barracks. Douaumont, that we'll talk about, I think was just used as a barracks.
With as much prestige as that place has, when we get to actually talking about the capture of it and how many people are trying to man this fort, it's pretty embarrassing. I think part of the reason for that is because the fortified region of Verdun, that salient, that bulge that it was located in, that was what was left over after the German invasion of 1914. So from von Falkenhayn's perspective, it's, hey, how is this thing still holding out after almost 2 years of us pushing into France? France's perspective, Joffre's perspective is, hey, they haven't taken this thing in like 2 years since this war started. I can obviously pull some shit out of here because they're not really going to be pushing here any further, and I can use this elsewhere.
Less trained troops, people that are on leave from other battlefields, we can kind of toss them down there as like a day-to-day operational thing, but they're not getting attacked.
There was also a big thing that Joffre kind of adopted as part of his doctrine was watching the German army move through Belgium. Belgium had forts, but the German artillery, the German artillery game was so elevated above what any of the other armies in Europe were, that they had developed these big Bertha howitzers that I think were like 16.5 inch. They were naval guns. Same thing if you're thinking of like the battleship Missouri or anything like that.
Yeah.
The guns on that were 16-inch guns. Wow. So they have these things on wheels that they're able to position closer to these forts and then just unload at these things. And regardless of how thick the walls are, you've only ever had to deal with smaller artillery, cannon fire, things like that. You've never had to worry about a high caliber howitzer round being launched at these walls. Not only that, but some of these things were on like time delays that they would penetrate in 40 feet into these walls and then explode and just completely demolish these. So a couple of these big, supposedly, unbreachable Belgian forts end up being pretty easily taken by the Germans. And Joffre looks at this and he says, so the fort thing's over, right?
Bad idea.
So yeah, like forts just aren't a thing anymore. The importance and strategic value of having a fixed, fortified position, that's null and void. The Germans have these guns that'll break through anything. We need to have these resources that these forts have, the men, the ammo, the guns that we're able to remove. These are going to be a much better use in other positions. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a bunch of them. And he does that to the tune of stripping about 54 artillery batteries. And a battery is not just one gun. How it worked with artillery is you would have a battery of, it differs between wars, but somewhere it's in the neighborhood of like 4 to 6 guns each in these batteries. So it would be a grouping of these guns together, and then those guns would all be working in concert with each other to try to hit the same position. So if you have 54 batteries at 4 to 6 guns each, he's taking somewhere in the neighborhood of like 300 to 400, even more, of these artillery pieces out of Verdun, along with 128,000 rounds of ammunition.
And those numbers in and of themselves, keep those in the back of your mind when we start talking about the buildups and how this war begins, because it's the artillery piece disparity is insane.
He even got to the point, too, where he had contingency plans where he was like, so we should just totally destroy Douaumont and this other like prestigious fort called Fort Vaux. We just need to actually destroy them, right? Enough so to the fact where he had, by the time I think it was captured, there was about 11,000 pounds of explosive sent to Fort Douaumont to eventually demolish this thing.
If they're not going to work for us, why are we going to give it to them to be able to fight us?
Correct, but they didn't have it yet.
Yeah.
And they hadn't shown you.
We need to blow it up
could,
before they can actually get a hold of it.
And in 2 years, they hadn't shown you that they could take it. It's a very odd move.
Well, Joffrey just doesn't quite seem like he cares that much. He doesn't probably care that much because he's been speaking with the Russians, he's been speaking with the British, and to a much, much lesser extent, the Italians. Because in 1916, there's supposed to be this kind of coordinated offensive. This is when we start talking about the buildup and the thoughts that the Somme are going to be an offensive. This is when we're talking about Russia at this point in time looking for the Brusilov offensive. Mm-hmm. They're going to go ahead and launch in on the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians because there's a belief on both sides that there's just not enough manpower to be able to sustain any sort of long war. And credit to the Triple Entente. They knew that the Germans only had so long that they could do this thing for. And Falkenhayn realized the exact same thing. That's why he figured, okay, if we put this hard pressure on Verdun in France, we can take their military capital, we can swipe them out of the way. By the end of 1916, going into 1917, this war is going to be pretty close to wrapped up.
This doesn't have to be a victory through conquest in the terms of land. Like we have this land, you guys no longer exist, i.e. we've conquered you. It's, well, land is a type of resource that they need, but manpower is also a type of resource that they need. They can't protect the land without men, and they know that. So if we just kill enough of their guys, that in itself is a path to victory as well.
Yeah. And on this German side, who's going to be leading the German kind of push into Verdun? The commander of the German Fifth Army was Crown Prince Friedrich Wilhelm. He was the son of the German Emperor Wilhelm II, which surprising, I would say, that I guess, as a commander, you're probably not going to die in battle, but you'd think the Crown Prince, the heir apparent, you're probably going to want to protect him more, right?
I don't know how close he was to this thing. I feel like this is one of those appointments that's kind of like, hey, we're going to go ahead and assign it to him because of the prestige, because it'll have probably a pretty nice propaganda ring to it, a lot of motivation from the troops if they're being commanded by, the Crown Prince. But at the same time, I think it's more like it's the Crown Prince and then a few guys that are really running the show right below him, and they just come back to him and report, hey, this is how it's going. He's like, okay, carry on.
That's a great point, because his second in command is this former Prussian general that Wilhelm II actually brought in to basically do most of Crown Prince Wilhelm's training and teaching.
I got a guy.
Yeah, his name is Konstantin von Nobelsdorf. Great name. Probably a bad guy, but a great name. A lot of Ks.
Very mix of Russian and German there. The Konstantin sounds very Russian. Mm-hmm. The Nobelsdorf sounds very German.
But Konstantin changes to way more German when you throw a K on the beginning of it.
That's true.
So you have a very brilliant Prussian mind who's sitting in Prussia, again, has had fighting with France going on previously. Mm-hmm. This was in the 19th century that Prussia and France had been at war at different times.
Again, this is Prussia with a hard P, which used to exist as its own separate entity.
Kind of its little floater. Both the Crown Prince and Nobelsdorf wanted this full-on assault. They wanted to assault the East Bank. They wanted to assault the West Bank. And Falkenhayn wanted the East Bank only because he wanted to hold these troops in reserve. He believed that if he could hold these troops in reserve and they could make far enough advances on the East Coast, or on the eastern, the eastern side of the Meuse River, he could have them in case there's going to be an attack somewhere else, or he can basically send in those reinforcements to finally wipe everybody out.
So you have Verdun, which is kind of in the middle of this salient, this bulge. And then you have, it's not right at the front line. You have a pretty sizable amount of space that goes out and around where these French forts and everything like that are holding the perimeter around Verdun. And so with the Meuse River cutting through essentially the middle of Verdun, I believe it divides the city, you have that going up. And eventually at some point, as the river is heading north, you do have German forces both on the west bank of the river and on the east bank of the river. But getting down closer to Verdun, there's not any German forces that are close to the Meuse River at that point. They're all pretty far to the east.
Yeah.
And so most of the fighting that's going to take place is not going to be back behind Verdun, closer, to the west and everything. It's going to be all in the areas that are from Verdun eastward, leading out to where the actual German line is at that point.
The East makes sense to attack. If I'm trying to win this, I would say I'm on the Crown Prince's side here that an Eastern-Western attack makes more sense.
We have to clear out the stuff that's in front of us before we can even talk about what's on the other side of the river.
Yeah, so it's certainly a difference in opinion, but at the same time, Falkenhayn, even though you have the Crown Prince that's pushing for something and Nobelsdorf pushing for the Eastern and Western, Falkenhayn's the ultimate decision maker at this point. So these troops do get held in reserve. I believe it was like he had 21 batteries of troops that he was holding back, or 21 groups that he was holding
battalions
back.
Or something like that. However they rated their group sizing at that point.
Which was a pretty decent force. And there's other talks in the German army about, hey, we need to attack here, we need to attack here. There's this belief that there is going to be a French offensive that would become the Somme, that becomes British because of what happens here at Verdun. So he wants to be able to hold those. And at the same time, he also knows that the Austro-Hungarian Empire is just dying.
Yeah.
They're going to need help eventually.
The clock is ticking at this point. Like, you have to make some ground and put some pressure on the French, because it's only a matter of time before you're going to start weakening, and either the Austria-Hungarian, army is going to give out and you're going to have another front to deal with, or you're going to get rid of France, stop having to fight with them, and be able to then put your attention elsewhere.
Pivot.
Yeah.
Swivel a little bit else
Pivot.
On this Western front. And the French felt the same way about the German troops, like we talked about earlier. They were both very, very wrong about the amount of troops. And we're going to get to a point to where Falkenhayn is so confused and so stupid that he's reporting back. He's saying, hey, we're doing so well with this. For every 4 French soldiers that die, that's how many it takes to kill one German. When in truth, it was like 1.2 French soldiers for every German death.
There's like a 10% discrepancy between the amount of French that were dying and the amount of Germans that were actually dying. And that just simply comes in to effect because of a tactic that the French end up taking, where it's almost misleading that the information coming back to von Falkenhayn is like, they are pulling these French units off the line like crazy. And then they're having to bring in other French units to support them. And in von Falkenhayn's mind, he's thinking of, okay, when would I pull off a unit? I would pull off a unit when they were down to like 30% fighting strength. That was just the way that kind of the military doctrine took place at that point, is you didn't pull a unit or a battalion or whatever off the line until they were just completely combat ineffective. They were almost destroyed. And then you sent back the survivors. They would then have to be split up and put into other units to reinforce them. And that unit itself would just cease to exist. Eventually, France is like, you know what? Let's try something different. Let's wait till they're maybe down to 50%, not destroyed or anything like that, repairable. We'll pull them off the line. We'll move in a new unit that's able to take their place, and then we can build up the strength of that 50% unit much faster. But in von Falkenhayn's head, he's thinking, if a unit's taken off the line, it means we've taken out 70 to 80% of them. I'm doing the numbers in my head. We're completely winning this thing.
There's no way that the French are just doing something completely different.
They're having to pump in more every day. They're having to bring in new guys.
Yeah, and like we talked about before, this wasn't supposed to be a total war. It was supposed to be heavy artillery used to minimize troop deaths, that the full charge would cost. This limited offensive was supposed to destroy the French again via these fruitless counterattacks. If we can bait them into coming and fighting us on basically the soil that we take instead of the soil that they still have, it's going to be an ultimate victory for us.
We need to take their shit and then kill them when they come back to take their shit.
Yeah. And in reality, Joffrey just saw the ease in which the Germans, as you were talking about earlier, took all of the Belgian fortresses in Liège in 1914. And his plan was, all right, we're going to destroy all these forts on the Meuse Heights, and then we're going to retreat back behind the city to where he believed that there was a better position to be held.
You're also using the natural defense of the river itself.
Yeah.
And if you can stop these guys from getting across the river, it's going to help you out. I can see that perspective, but at the same time, where to your north, they were technically already across the river. If you're letting them get that close to the river, they're just crossing further up or down the river, however you want to say, where they already have control of those areas. Keep them at the distance as far of an arm's length as you possibly can is kind of the tactic that they need to do.
Well, there's also a fundamental miscalculation on what the morale killer it would be to lose Verdun for France is.
Yeah.
Just because you're giving up the city for a more strategic position doesn't mean that your soldiers are going to be like, all right, we understand that Verdun's not that big of a deal. It's the military capital of France.
Here's how big of a deal it was. Attila the Hun tried and failed to take the town in the 5th century. So it had the prestige of saying like, yeah, we told Attila to fucking kick rocks and he didn't conquer us. So if you're going to say that you're going to get conquered by von Falkenhayn, but Attila's not able to do this, that's a blow to the prestige.
Mm-hmm. And as you were talking about the salient surrounded on 3 sides, there is a single road that we'll talk about because it's fucking awesome. And a very small light railway that runs from a city named Bar-le-Duc to Verdun. On the German side, there's this complex network. They had 10 railways that they had built to this front, whereas Verdun had one small railway and one road.
Yes, please keep in mind that we're talking World War I, so the main means of bringing any type of supplies is not going to be by actual just truck or anything like that. The technology is not there to make these things efficient enough or be mass-produced in a number where you can just haul all of your equipment via truck. This is all done via railway. So if you have...
And horse and carriage.
and horse and carriage, much slower. But yeah, your ability to resupply by rail is kind of the lifeblood of actually being able to maintain your military. So at the time Verdun is going to actually kind of get kicked off, the status of the fortified Verdun region has been really, really diminished. 18 of the large forts and other batteries were left with less than 300 guns, and most of the fort garrisons had been reduced to maintenance crews. So just people that were able to basically upkeep and keep the places running.
If you're going to blow it up, why do you have them there?
That's what I'm saying. Like the plans don't jive together. So you have these guys that are basically just sitting there making sure that the fort stays operational, but not in a number where if the fort needs to be operational, you have enough guys to actually operate the fort. Railway lines to Verdun had been destroyed back in 1914 by that other arm of the salient that went around down south. Railways to the west in the mid 1915 had been destroyed. Kind of northwest of Verdun is where those had been destroyed because, again, that was under German control. And like you just said, one small road and one kind of minor railway were all that were able to be consistently used to try to supply not just the city of Verdun, but all of the forts and all of the areas around Verdun that are going to be contested here.
On the German side, not only the railways, but as we talked about so much during the Somme, you have these trench constructions on both sides of the battlefield. You have a front trench, and then you have all of these trenches behind it, to where if you're bringing in massive amounts of people to be filling these trenches, it's going to be pretty noticeable.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to see it. And the secrecy of this French buildup was so that they started building these things into the ground. They were just elaborately built. They're called stolons. And it's basically they were large bunkers that were built down below ground that could hold hundreds of thousands or hundreds and then thousands of troops that they were bringing in
French side or German side?
on the German side.
Okay, yes.
And these Stolens were able to hide just the amount of buildup. I want to say it was the buildup on the German side ended up being 150,000 troops before this war started.
So it's troops, it's materials, it's ammunition the troops are going to need. They're running thousands of kilometers of phone cable that are being laid down so they can communicate with the front the front lines and everything. But then also once they start moving forward, they already have communication devices established that they can then just keep pushing forward. So they're building an infrastructure here.
This shit blew me away. They brought in over 1,200 artillery pieces and 2.5 million. And this is that changing of how war works.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't 2.5 million cannonballs that they're bringing into fire. Yeah.
Shells or rounds.
These are gas and explosive shells. These aren't slugs. These aren't just going to hit the ground and make a big crater.
Yeah.
These are going to hit the ground and explode, or hit the ground and explode with a gas that is going to completely just fry everybody in the radius.
33.5 munition trains delivered enough for 2 million rounds to be fired in the first 6 days, and another 2 million in the next 12 days on the German side once this thing gets popping. And like you said, 1,200 guns were massed on the Verdun front. 2/3 of those were heavy and considered super heavy.
Well, go ahead.
They had established 5 repair shops built close to the front where they could repair minor damage. Because again, with these guns firing, they require constant upkeep. The barrels end up wearing out, which means that you're launching anything out of those, there's a likelihood that it could blow up in there. The accuracy gets thrown off. So you're constantly sending things back to be repaired. If they can't be repaired, Germany has been cranking shit out in their factories, ready to just continually send barrels for these, pieces of heavy artillery up. And some of the pieces, like the Big Bertha, the 16.5 howitzer.
This thing was actually called the Big Bertha.
It was called the Big Bertha.
So this is where Callaway that rips that off for their drivers?
Yes.
Okay.
So
nice.
These things had to be broken up, I believe, into like 5 different component parts because they were so heavy. I want to say 48 tons is what this cannon or what this howitzer actually weighed. But it would be broken up into these pieces. The initial assembly, once it was brought to its position where it was going to be set up for an assault, took over 6 hours and 200 dudes to build this gun.
Per gun.
And then guess what? You fired, you took out whatever you were doing, you had to disassemble it back up into its 5 main components. 47 tons assembled. And then you had to then move these guns over area that you had just previously obliterated with all of this shelling.
The number one descriptor that we just kept hearing in all of the documentaries and podcasts and everything was a moonscape.
Yes.
This was just an area of craters that they built because they fired so much artillery.
Can you imagine that the first time somebody was able to look at something that maybe resembled a little bit of the moon was on a World War I battlefield? And then further along in history, we'll look at that and be like, hey, that's the moon.
Yeah.
No, that's just hell.
Armstrong brought up a picture of Verdun from 1916 and looked at the moon. He's like, yeah, it's pretty accurate.
Looking at the picture, looking at the moon, looking at the picture.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, these things, so as far as the big boys go, the Big Berthas, they could fire 8 rounds an hour.
Oh, my God. And that probably has a lot to do with just the heat that's on the firings, right?
I think it also had to do with, we'll do a little inside baseball here. So these types of guns, from an accuracy standpoint, I was trying to figure out when I looked into how these batteries would fire and determine where they were hitting. It's like, how accurate could these things actually be? Because the recoil on these guns is so massive. How would these things ever settle back into a position that was the same position you had on the shot that you just made? And how do you know that it's off? Because all of a sudden the wheels are in a different position because of the kickback that this thing had. This is where you get the development of the guns themselves that just had the built-in recoil. where the gun didn't move. Kind
Oh.
of like you think of like an anti-aircraft gun in World War
Yes.
II that launched up. It was just the barrel that like kind of retracted and then went back up. So the mounting of the cannon never moved. It was just the actual barrel. So then you could get much more effective fire over a repeated amount of time. But the shells for the big ones weighed 1,800 pounds.
So it's going to take a minute to reload this thing.
Yes. And some of them were almost 5 feet long. So these are the shells that I want to say that you're also putting into it and putting powder packs in some scenarios like they do with naval guns.
It's going to be a dumb question. Is this breech load or is this down? It couldn't be down the barrel.
Oh, no, breech.
Okay.
Like you're saying, the back of it would open up. They would load in the shell, and then they would have to load in the powder packs, load it back in, take the little lanyard thing that attached to it. And on some of the big ones, like the Big Berthas, they would have to back up literally hundreds of feet, or the concussion would fucking rattle their skulls.
I'm sure the testing in that you didn't want to volunteer for. They had more deaths probably in the testing phase than they did of
probably
anything.
The amount of hearing loss is just staggering.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Just for this initial bombardment, this number blew me away. So for the initial bombardment, it took 1,300 munitions trains brought in that were just solely for shells. That's not food. That's not any other supplies. That's 1,300 trains just for munitions.
So 1,300 carriages over the course of 33 and a half full-blown munitions trains.
Yeah, dude, that's a lot just for munitions.
Yeah.
You're hungry as hell on this battlefield getting ready for this. You're like, okay, that's shells. No.
You're hand loading and unloading all of this stuff. Like, the logistics alone are bonkers for this, which is also why you kind of think to yourself, man, this has to take so much time and there's so much visibility. How do you not notice this many fucking trains rolling up and prepare yourself and everything? And it's because up to the point of the start of the battle, there was a huge discrepancy in the amount of aircraft the Germans had versus the French. And in World War I, this is where you're getting your surveillance from. So again, I touched on this earlier, planes fly over, they report positions, they report troop movements, gatherings, things like that. And then at least your army knows, hey, maybe we can't hit them, but we need to start building up our strength here as well because some shit's about to go down. When you have twice as many German planes up there, then that becomes the scenario where you have planes up that are doing reconnaissance on the German side, but then you also have ones that are moving in to shoot down any of these French planes that are trying to fly over your area.
The Germans, it's so weird to say this about a World War I battle. The Germans had air superiority.
Yes.
They had their spotting balloons up. They had reconnaissance planes. They had defensive planes to make sure that, as you were talking about, any French plane that goes up isn't going to get anywhere near close enough to be able to spot and see. And if they do, they're going to be shot down.
Can you imagine the tightness your ass would feel if you were a French dude up in one of those balloons and you were trying to spot and you just heard... and you were just looking anywhere and everywhere to see because you're stationary and this thing's coming in and just going to riddle you with machine gun fire.
You were lied to for sure. When they sent you up, you're like, hey, this balloon's bulletproof, right? They're like, oh yeah, it's air bullets. There's no way that this thing will penetrate.
You're not though.
Yeah, so tuck down in the basket as tight as you can, but don't worry about the balloon. They're not going to be able to pop the balloon.
I'm hearing a lot of leaking noises. I seem to be descending at a rapid rate.
Joffre finally has to start planning for Verdun. It takes him so long, but the French president finally intervenes. Raymond Poincaré was the French president at the time, and he knew exactly what we were talking about. We can't have any more losses on the morale side for the French. We're not going to cede any more ground or any more towns or anything like that to the Germans. It's just not going to happen. He directs him, do not give an inch, do not give anything else. And this rush to reinforce Verdun isn't like a 6-month run-up. He pivots almost at the last second. We're talking into 1916. They're still digging trenches kind of haphazardly and not in a good fashion to be able to protect this area.
Yeah.
And not to mention, they're not amassing the amount of troops that the Germans are because they don't know how many Germans are being amassed on that side.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think they started the attack from the French perspective, started the attack with 70 aircraft, 632 guns throughout the region of Verdun. Again, this is a pretty spread out region, and about 30,000 troops. So the battlefield itself is actually going to cover a pretty small area of about between, and I know this is a pretty big number discrepancy, between 37 and 100 square miles. And the reason they give that is because there are certain, think of it, intensities of the fighting that are going on where stuff's happening for the most part, but then areas outside of that are still having skirmishes and things like that.
Yeah.
So the 100 square miles, if you're out that far, it's going to be more like light fighting, things like that. But a vast concentration of the fighting, and especially of the barrages, the artillery barrages, are going to be coming within closer to that 37 square mile area. There's an 8 square mile core battleground that actually occurs during this. So 8 square miles in which just a concentration of 1,200 German guns. And again, that's not saying what's being brought up after the start of the battle. That's what they actually start with.
Fighting 600 French guns?
Yes. And again, 2/3 of the German guns are the heavy or super heavy variety. There's enough stuff launched during this battle that still today, there's a 65 square mile area considered a red zone in Verdun in which the public is advised not to go because there is so much unexploded ordnance from World War I that it's a danger to the public.
This is just like when we were talking about the metal farming in the Somme. Those guys that are out there in their fields where they'll just be rolling a plow through and all of a sudden you're pink, and it's a shell that was unexploded that's just sitting in the middle of their farmland.
And you hope to God that tink is not the last sound that you ever hear. Can you imagine that's like, how did you get this land so cheap? Oh, I mean, this was where the Somme was. Oh, still alive, huh?
How did the previous owner die in World War I? It's 1975.
Sorry, unexploded World War I ordnance.
So from October 1915, they begin building these 3 French trench lines. There's the primary line, then you have the secondary line, and then the tertiary line. There were so few French troops that were stationed in Verdun that these things just were not being dug at a rate that, dug, right? Mm-hmm. Not digged. That's hanged and hung. I'm getting caught up on that were dug. January 1916, there's a full inspection of these trenches. They said, they're satisfactory. There's a few small deficiencies in certain areas. Well, these small deficiencies in these certain areas were the connections between the trenches, which meant that if you don't connect your trenches in a certain way, if you're trying to move back to the second trench, there's going to be a fairly large amount of space that you're going to have to run on open ground.
Yeah, just a little refresher back from our Somme episode and also the World War I overview. So with trench warfare, of course, you would have the trenches that were running parallel to each other, facing each other, and then you would have trenches going back further from those lines. You got to connect those, just like Adam said. And you can't have guys being like, we got to get to that first trench, and then run over literally hundreds of yards of open terrain where you're just fodder. You would have to have, and you're not doing straight lines either that connect your first trench back to your second trench, because then as soon as the Germans figure out exactly where the, degree or whatever the location of that trench is, they're just constantly bombing it. You have a zigzag pattern of these trenches going back between the first and second, and the second and third. If those aren't operational, whoever you're positioning in that first trench is just cut off.
Yeah. You're in no man's land. You're essentially in a hole in no man's land.
Yes.
They dug you a grave out in no man's land that you're just going to have to die to get out of.
Yes.
That's basically how it's all set up. There were just areas that were awful. Fort Douaumont, this crown jewel of these forts, was basically stripped of most guns, as Chris was talking about earlier. It was used primarily as a barracks. It was run by a crew of 68 technicians. And these 68 technicians hadn't even gone through to fix the drawbridge that had been blown open, or been blown so it's completely sitting down.
It was stuck in the down. It was stuck in the position that you don't want a drawbridge to be stuck in, open for business.
Yeah. They just hadn't fixed this. So you have supposedly the most impenetrable fortress that you have up there that just has an open door at the front of it.
And it's not a high-ranking guy that's in charge of these technicians either. It's some NCO or lower-ranking dude who's just basically there to make sure that everything kind of works in a manner that can be used if need be.
Yep. And the reason that this drawbridge is down is because the Germans had already shelled this area previously when they were going through. Mm-hmm. And so they had a year plus to fix it. This wasn't like it was a recent issue.
Position-wise, Douaumont, if you're kind of looking at the salient. So I always refer stuff to like a clock. Mm-hmm. So let's imagine that Verdun is in the very center of your clock. So everything from roughly your 10 o'clock all the way down to your 5 o'clock, that whole arc, that is all the German line. So pretty much from your 5 o'clock to 9 o'clock, that's what your open area is of French-controlled area.
Not a lot. Not a
lot
at all.
Douaumont is probably located somewhere at like either between the 2 o'clock and the 3 o'clock of Verdun. So it's supposedly it's the linchpin fort of this whole Verdun fortified area. It's the crown jewel. It's sitting out in front. It's supposed to give one of the first lines of defense. And so losing this, especially very early on, is not going to bode well for the future defense of this area.
You have this guy named Colonel Emile Drian that is stationed at Verdun, just begging Joffre to stop stealing shit from their defenses. Just like, come on, man. You know that we still have to be in this war, and you're not here. You're not the one that could end up getting jumped.
Dude, have you not seen the guys they're bringing in?
Do you think they have air superiority over an area that they're not going to be fighting in?
Yeah.
Probably not.
They just want to see what we're doing.
Feels pretty stupid. And up until this point, you have kind of these little feints, these little German batteries that are starting shit in other areas, a lot like we were doing during D-Day.
They're prodding. I feel like they're kind of prodding, especially to draw attention to be like, oh, is this where the attack's coming?
But again, you have to know, based upon Drian being on the ground explaining to you what's going on.
I also don't know how you look at the area of Verdun, the bulge that it's in, and think to yourself, hey, if I was a commander and I was in the German commander's shoes, this is definitely something that I would try to take because I feel like I got a huge advantage on the area surrounding this, right?
Yep. Surrounded them on three sides where you can just go ahead and take the whole thing. Mm-hmm. You'd think that would be the thought. Joffre believes that any attack on Verdun is just going to be a distraction for an attack that's most likely going to be taking place in Champagne because that was the last region that they tried to hit.
Champagne further north?
I believe so. I think it was more of a northeasterly area.
Okay.
And at the same time, you have the 7th Corps ordered to Verdun January 23rd, 1916. January 23rd is going to be so close to the beginning of this. They're told that they're going to be holding the north face of the western bank. You have the 30th Corps is going to be stationed on the east bank. They have 3 corps on the eastern, or 11 corps on the, wow, Jesus Christ. The 2nd Corps, Roman numerals got me again. The 2nd Corps is going to be on the eastern Meuse Heights. So you're putting these different troops up in these areas for protection. Joffre ends up holding up 25 divisions in reserve because he has eyes for the Somme. Mm-hmm. The Somme is supposed to be this French-led offensive that he's going to need these extra 25 divisions.
I feel like that's where his attention has been, right?
But if you think about it, how much fun is playing defense?
Yeah, exactly.
It sucks. And if you're trying to boost everybody's morale, it's going to come via wins.
If someone were to say, hey, we've held this place for the last 2 years. Nothing's happening here. Not a lot of progress to be had. But here, there is a possibility that you can claim a great victory and then move a little bit further into Germany. I can see his position on that, but he's sacrificing the attention that needs to be on Verdun in his planning of the Somme.
And at that point, it's just planning.
Yeah.
There's no concrete thing that's going to happen.
But that's why in his head, he sees it as such a great opportunity.
Yeah.
It's in that honeymoon stage of planning where he's like, everything I'm going to do here is going to work. It's all going to be golden. Verdun will take care of itself.
We've had 2 years of getting punched. It's time to start throwing some blows back. This leads to just French. I mean, their setup there was absolutely incredible. As Chris talked about, 632 field guns and heavy guns that made up the heavy artillery, 30,000 troops. So those 3 corps that we were talking about that were out on the defenses, plus everybody that was back in Verdun, we're talking a total of 30,000 troops. Many of these corps that are in there are, again, troops that are less trained, they're less battle-hardened. They have less of an understanding of how a war needs to go.
I believe Verdun was kind of treated like the Bastogne region was in World War II before the Battle of the Bulge. There's a lot of similarities to this.
Yes.
Because you would take troops that were either in recuperation, like units that were trying to build their strength back up, or new green units that you were trying to get a little bit, seasoned. And you would send them to these areas where there was enough fighting that they could get a little bit of experience, but that it wasn't heavy enough where it's going to set them back or cause them, casualties and things like that. So I'm trying to think of how we compared it to when we were talking about Bastogne. It's not like a retreat. It's more of like a rest and recuperation region.
It's a Cold War, basically, that's going on there. There's no hot battlefield.
We're gonna get you close enough to get a taste of it, so that way when we actually throw you into the heavy shit in the meat grinder, it's not going to be such a shock.
Yeah, you'll be better off. Before we get into Operation Judgment, you want to take a bathroom break?
Yep, let's do it. Well, hello. Listen, while we head to the restroom and get ourselves something to drink, why don't you do something nice for yourselves? Head on over to patreon.com/historicallyhigh and get signed up for a little bonus content. I mean, come on, you deserve it.
If you want to keep up with this, our main source of social media is going to be our Instagram, which is Historically High Pod, POD.
You can also head over to, it's Twitter. It's X, it's Twitter, come on, at Historically High, and that's high, H-I like, high.
If you have any recommendations you want to get to us, just want to reach out and say hello, you can hit us up on our email at historicallyhighpodcast, HIGH podcast at gmail.com.
All right, and with that said, let's get back to the good stuff. All right, so we come to it, Operation Judgment. February 12th.
Talk about operation names quite a bit. Operation Judgment, pretty good.
Yeah, early war operations had to be pretty easy because you didn't have to worry about repetition. I think we've talked about this during several war episodes, is how many badass operation names were left on the cutting room floor? Or was it that they had a list of badass names and once they got an approved plan, they were just like, we're now going to assign Juggernaut to this one?
Yeah, well, we don't want this to be a juggernaut. We want to hold the French in judgment at Verdun to take their area over. I love just German sounds like such an angry language to me. Untermann Gericht is Operation Judgment.
Do you think it sounds aggressive because stuff we have looked into has been done in an aggressive... It's been yelled at by a tiny man with a tiny mustache.
It's a history of aggression in the language, for sure. It was supposed to begin February 12th. Operation Judgment was slated for February 12th. And quite possibly the greatest ally of the French army at this time wasn't Britain, it wasn't Russia, it's not the U.S. infantry trying to step in. It's Mother Nature just dumping this late winter rain and wind and everything that would affect an artillery barrage from happening.
Well, what do? You can still kick it off on the 12th, but then Do you go?
Yeah.
We just talked about this during the break. Von Falkenhayn's plan is this. We're going to move in. My plan of bleeding the French dry, that takes effect after we have taken the heights, and we have now forced them to try to retake the ground. And then once we get to that point in my plan, it's going to go off. Guaranteed to work. There's just the A to B about getting us from the current position of the line to the heights and taking them over. But that's the simple part. We're just going to bombard the shit out of them and then march our troops in. But makes it a little bit harder to do if the ground's all torn up, if it's all mud. We're still needing to move stuff in via, wheel and wagon and everything like that to move these guns up. We probably do need to wait until it dries up a bit. And with the fog, until we can actually see what we're shooting at.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, you need those spotters up in the air. They had nearly 280 German aircraft that have been keeping this air superiority over this German buildup. They had bombers, they had fighters, they had the observation balloons. France begins with about 70 aircraft.
I always see World War I bombers as basically being like, so you're telling me you had 2 or 3 guys actually in the plane that were just holding grenades and would just drop them out?
Well, my thought is we're still pretty new to this whole lifting a bunch of weight up into the air.
Aerodynamics is definitely something that has not been a long-studied science at this point in history.
We got a decade and some change in launching this shit up into the air. Now you want us to attach very heavy bombs to the bottom of this that's supposed to keep flying with us inside of it?
It's been like 10 years. You think that wasn't somebody's first thought, is now we can kill people from above?
How do we make these wings strong enough to be able to hold extra weight to be dropping bombs?
Yeah.
There's just so much that goes into it. Yeah, dude, you're a decade and a little bit longer from the Wright brothers, and now you're just like, all right, we're using these to drop some shit. Mm-hmm. It's going to get nasty quick. The fog and heavy rains and winds end up delaying the offensive for 9 days. It begins February 21st, 7:15 a.m. This is so similar to the Somme, and I'm sure that the Somme beginning wasn't an idea that they had until this happened.
Yeah.
Because it's very much a copycat league.
Because now they know they can do it.
Yeah. You had a 10-hour bombardment that begins. The German artillery fired more than 1 million shells along a 19-mile or 30-kilometer long line. And they were firing them deep. We're talking about 3.1 miles or 5 kilometers wide. So they're firing them very far behind these lines.
19 miles long is this front that they're hitting with 1 million shells. I know that seems like a lot. It's 19 miles, and they're not targeting, think of it this way, it's not like a 19-mile stretch of bare land where every part of it needs to be hit. It is 19 miles where a good chunk of it is probably forested, where they're like, there's not a fort there, there's not troops there. They're still dialing these things in. They've had time to run the calculations of, which is insane. How much time did we spend on this? The bombardment calculations for how they would sight these things in, and what a science that became, and like how the trigonometry and all that kind of stuff. But you're still pinpointing a lot of this fire for these 1 million shells, and you're only going 3 miles back.
Well, bad news for a salient. It means that it's not a straight line. So it's a curvature where this 19-mile front is all firing kind of into basically like a half circle.
Yes. Almost the same shape that the salient is on the outside. It's creating a smaller arc of landing zone in this.
So 3.1 miles in there isn't just behind the line. It's basically in a half circle shooting in.
Yeah, again, it's not just a front in front of you where you're taking it from one direction. It's just wrapped all the way around you, all firing inward toward Verdun.
Pretty bad deal. The main concentration is going to be on the East Bank, like we were talking about. So after throughout this 10 hours, bombardment gets paused. It gets paused at midday. Is this idea of like, and you're thinking about it from the French side, like, thank God this is over with. They're done with it. I can go ahead and start popping my head up out of trenches. At this point in time, they're hiding back into the forest that's also being blown up, anywhere that they can keep themselves off of just obvious being out in the middle of no man's land. And so everybody starts popping their heads out. They start walking around. They're surveying the damage, but the bombardment's not over. This is just so all of the German spotters and planes can start seeing where these concentrations of soldiers are. So when the bombardment commences, you're going to see all of these shells headed towards where all these people were just standing.
You're repositioning too, because you go fly out after a 10-hour bombardment and you just see these strips and grouping of, and it's not like a plane flies out and he's just like, well, I see these shell marks. They're so dialed in that there's a plane that flies out that says, hey, you're going to fly in this region where this grouping was firing and you're going to report back only on this. So when they came back, he said, well, this is where the firing, there were these unhit strips. Here's where they were. This fort that I can see your massing of troops, like you just said, is now in this area. Make adjustments. Yeah. So it's a 10-hour, basically, review of what just happened in the previous 10 hours and what they need to alter.
Yeah, well, and this is going on during the 10 hours. This was just a pause at like hour 5 to go up, look around, be like, all right, we're going to do this for another 4 more hours. And it becomes I'll give Falkenhayn some credit here, pretty smart, pretty good move. So after they finish this 10-hour bombardment with these pauses to, let people out to kind of redial in the guns, they start pushing in at 4 p.m., which is insane. The barrage ceases at 4 p.m., and you start seeing German soldiers. There was 3 corps, the 3rd, the 7th, and the 18th corps that begin attacking using flamethrowers.
Stormtroopers and flamethrowers. And stormtroopers were considered like the elite shock troops that would go in first that had they were special forces is basically what the term stormtrooper was used for.
But they weren't firing guns. They all had grenades that they were throwing.
It was just as if we just have smaller explosives now.
Yeah. And they're going to be more accurate because I'm going to be walking by not a foxhole at this point in time, but a big crater from one of these artillery blasts that you guys are now hiding in that I'm just going to drop a grenade in.
It also makes a ton of sense because what's going to have survived that bombardment? Fortified positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Grenades and flamethrowers are what you use to take out those positions where you can just simply burn the inside of an emplacement just from the opening where the gun is firing out or toss grenades inside. So yes, like you just said, von Falkenhayn, if you're going to send in somebody like that, that's who's going to be... Dude, we did the same shit in the fucking Pacific Islands during World War II when we were island hopping. You would move in, flamethrowers would go in and grenades, and you would just pillbox by pillbox just destroy them.
Any of those spider holes or anything like that, there might be somebody in there. Throw a grenade in and see.
If it's not openly destroyed, then there's something hiding.
Yeah, you would think this is when everybody comes in. But again, an attack at 4 p.m., you might have 3 hours of daylight left, especially in February. 3 hours is pretty gracious.
As you go in and you take out these smaller emplacements, though, those things are the dangers to the infantry.
Yeah.
So you're basically like... The things we didn't hit with the big stuff, we're going to do a little bit more precision. We're going to hit those things. And then the infantry doesn't have to worry about shit. They can just simply move up, gain ground, guns move up. We start the whole thing over again.
This is going to be the last time I think that the artillery probably moves with any sort of pace for the Germans. Because there's going to be a run-up of just shorter range areas that they didn't hit. Once they start running up into the lunar landscape that they've created, then they get bogged down completely because you have to then cut through roads, which concentrates where everybody has to travel on land, which become easy targets.
This type of scale of artillery hadn't really happened up to this point. And so again, this is being prior to the Somme. I think you're seeing a lot of situations where the guys that are running the artillery, it's their first time experiencing having to move into the areas that they just previously bombed and finding the difficulties and kind of the problems they're going to be running into there.
Oh, yeah. And to give them even more credit, during these bombardments, we talked about it earlier, it's a very front leg, back legs. It's like watching a dog gallop. You have your light guns that are going to be moving forward while your heavy artillery is firing. Then as soon as the light guns get into their emplacements, they begin firing at a faster rate to where the heavy guns can then move up behind them. So basically there's no pause in the firing that's going on, and it just seems like they're constantly doing it without being able to move forward.
And it's just saturation bombardment. Yeah. When they talk about accuracy in this era of warfare, it's hey, we hit something within a few hundred yards of where we were actually aiming, but we launched so much shit within the area of that 100 yards that we eventually hit that target with 2 or 3 shells.
Yeah.
And that was worth it. And then you would have, so you're launching all of your larger artillery, keeping them pinned. And then regardless if the sound of the booms are quieter because your small stuff is firing, it still keeps you in a position of having to be in cover because, like we said, getting hit was not an intentional thing.
No.
If you went out and you got hit by a direct hit, that's not where they were aiming. They were aiming in your general vicinity. They weren't aiming at you. They were just aiming in the hope that someone was running around out there or their shell got lucky and hit something.
Yeah, if you got hit directly, it was just a bad day for you.
It was so unlucky.
There wasn't anything that they were doing. They said that the fire rate at one point in time, Driant was reporting that he believed that they had over 2,000 heavy artillery.
I think that was something, too, that when it was reported back, because again, this is all French. There's no Brits here. It was reported back to the Brits what were happening, and they were describing essentially the length of time of the bombardment, what they were hearing, and they're like, oh, they've got 2,500 guns. Like, there's no way they have less than 2,500 guns.
It's coming like crazy. So on this first day, the French, again, to their credit, on this side, fought back. They managed to capture about 600. It was 600 captures and casualties that they had from the Germans. And when they captured these Germans and they're talking to them, they're like, this is your guys' infantry front. And the Germans immediately like, this was day one. The heavy forces are coming day two.
Oh, so funny. We've also forgot to mention one thing that did tip off the French, not that the buildup needed to be tipped off anymore, was some soldiers from Alsace, I think, that had moved over from the German side that they had been conquered and were supposed to be fighting for the Germans. And they were like, yeah, we're going to go over to the French. They were able to escape, come to the French, and like, just so y'all know, they're actually planning to attack here. So you might want to start, getting your shit together.
Yeah, just deserters that were coming over and had really no dog in the fight besides they said they were going to be more German than French.
Germany just hit them first.
Spilled the beans, pretty much. So they find out that day one, this 10-hour bombardment and then this rush of these stormtroopers and these flamethrowers isn't all that they're going to be facing. By the 22nd, the next day, German troops had advanced a little over 3 miles or 5 kilometers. And French troops are holding out at this point in time to slow this movement. This is very much to reference another episode that we did, the same thing with the Battle of the Bulge. There was a German plan that they were going to be moving very quickly to take this. Yeah. This was not necessarily a blitzkrieg, but this was supposed to be a very fast advancement. Mm-hmm. And just like in the Battle of the Bulge, when you have these areas that are holding out and keeping them at bay, it becomes this game of like, okay, well, yeah, we were supposed to be up 5 miles, but 3 miles is still pretty good.
You have to have like all the parts working at the same time for the machine to function correctly. And so the way that von Falkenhayn essentially pushes the troops forward in this kind of initial attack is going to be kind of, again, going back to that clock reference and everything. You have the areas between basically like noon, maybe 1 o'clock, all the way down to probably 4 o'clock. That's where he's going to be doing his initial thrust. He's holding everybody that's up in that 12 o'clock over to 10 o'clock position, and he's kind of holding them in wait to see how that other part is going to occur. But when you run into that kind of wall of force or, of the Germans moving down, all of a sudden, if something causes a holdup there, it's not like it doesn't affect both sides of it.
Yeah.
All of a sudden there's a holdup and you're just like, well, we're counting on you to take care of this kind of stuff. And if you're not up here already, we can't move up.
Are we going to have to divert more resources to where you're still fighting these guys?
Yeah.
Are we going to have to pull off from other areas?
Mm-hmm. It's like if someone's trying to stretch like a latex balloon over something and then you hold up something sharp and they keep trying to move it. If you push enough pressure against that sharp point, which would be like a holdout, if you push it too much, it's going to end up causing the integrity of the whole line to fail.
There were 2 French battalions that held on to Les Bois, which the trees, for 2 days. until retreating, but they slowly advance for 2 days. That's 48 more hours that area is not going to be able to be moved up.
That more forces even behind them get to move up as well or further establish themselves.
Driant ends up being killed in battle. He was with the 56th and the 59th Battalion. Only 118 of the 12 to 1,300 men in these battalions.
I forgot, who was Driant?
Driant was the colonel that was there in Verdun.
Okay, gotcha.
So he was out fighting.
He was the dude that was turning around to von Falkenhayn, or not von Falkenhayn, but Joffre, and being like,
more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe this was, I didn't write it down exactly with Driant, but Driant gets pinned down in this town, I believe it was. And all of the reports that the French are getting was that this town had been taken. And the French are like, well, shit, hopefully Driant was able to escape. We need to start bombarding this French village that the Germans have overrun.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Driant is still holding on to the village. And he's trying to report back saying, hey, I'm still here.
They're cut off, right?
Yeah.
Is this where we get the pigeon?
Yes.
Okay.
Driant saying, we're still here. We need reinforcements. Don't fire on this position.
Hey, fuckers, see the flag that's still flying?
Still red, white, and blue. We're still in this area. Maybe let's hold off. Well, the Germans are currently bombarding and trying to hit Driant in this town. And then you have the French, who believe that the Germans are occupying this town, start bombarding the exact same town. So you have French artillery and German artillery falling on this French village that both sides believe are held by different territories.
Yeah, that's how much, so quickly things are happening. Lines of communication being interrupted, and it's just a mad scramble to try to figure out what's going on.
So how does Driant have to get this word back? All the cables and everything have been cut. Comes down to Driant launching a pigeon.
Which happened much more often for communication during this period than is believed.
But at the same point in time, a pigeon that's in the air as bombardments are coming towards it from all directions has to have completely messed this pigeon's brain up.
Just, yeah, it's not a Randy Johnson fastball situation where something's going to hit this thing, but just because God, I'm going to fucking butcher this. They navigate through a certain type of like magnetic detection or something like that, where they can get, especially ones that are meant to go from one location to another. It's got to have something pretty delicate that tells them where that other location is. And just the constant explosions going on around them and concussive like force, you would think that would maybe scramble a bird's brain a little bit.
Knock them out of the air, really anything.
Force them to be like, hey, being airborne during this time is pretty much the most unnatural thing for a bird to be, so I'm going to go and hunker down. Not this pigeon, though.
No. Pigeon makes it. Unfortunately, the pigeon makes it way too late because the French have already dumped a bunch of shells into this. The Germans have already dumped.
It's the speed of pigeon, man.
Yeah. But still, 118 out of potentially 1,300 Frenchmen are held up there. That's a total loss of those two battalions that are there. Germans took French villages at this point in time. They were repelled at Bois that we talked about. It was Bois des Arbois. Not even close, probably. There was a failed French counterattack on the 23rd to try to take this back. And over the 23rd and 24th, the German casualties, I mean, they were mounting pretty quickly. Through this advance, as they continued, they're losing men. Because they're being fired back on by the French. This isn't just a total German victory.
They're attacking defensive positions. In the same way that von Falkenhayn is like, our mission is going to be accomplished by being on the defensive and having them just throw people at us. He's doing the exact same thing. His plan is contingent on the French not being as good at the part of his plan that he thinks he is. And you're going to lose, especially regardless of the bombardment. Yeah, that's going to keep people's heads down. It's going to let you advance. It's going to destroy some stuff that's going to kill your guys. But at the same time, you are still advancing into already held territory.
The Germans might be stripped, or the French might be stripped down. They might not have the guns and the firepower there. But they still do have the occasional machine gun that if you're moving in a group, you will be sawed off.
Or enough guys that have enough rifles that can take out, again, this isn't an age of tanks.
No.
This isn't where we're moving tanks and soldiers can hide behind armor. That's why there's so much of an emphasis on artillery. Artillery is like, well, we don't have armor for them moving forward, so we just have to make sure there's nothing in front of them to fire at them.
Yeah. February 25th, around 3 p.m., German forces advanced up Côte 347. They took French prisoners at this point in time. They were basically able to rush this because they had moved up a lot of their light machine guns and just started basically firing upwards up the hill.
Yeah.
They would cut off the firing. The Germans would move up. They would spread out of the way. They would fire again to advance. And they were able to start taking these French high grounds that were so important to the protection of Verdun. And then, magically, the French that are remaining on the hill in the forest retreat down to the village of Douaumont, because there's a fort in a village of Douaumont. They are able to basically look down into the village of Douaumont. They see the big cathedral that's down there. They know that Douaumont's pretty ripe for the taking. And then all of the machine gun fire just starts pouring out of Douaumont back up at these Germans, and they're like, not taking the village yet. We're going to hold that off. We have something else in this Douaumont region that we need to wipe off the map first. Yeah. That's the big giant fort that we're worried
What's going to do more damage to us? The big guns or a bunch of these machine guns? We can either pour a bunch of resources into this, or we could take the fort, which will then cut off the village, which at that point, we just have to then wait them out a little bit or wait till we have our guns to just level this. Because there were so many instances where they were talking about French villages and towns that existed within this region. This isn't just a region of, hey, it's Verdun, and then a bunch of forts just all over the place, and then nothing else. This is Verdun, the forts, and a bunch of little villages or hamlets or whatever you want to call them that by the end of this thing just don't exist anymore. As in, never rebuilt. There's simply just a street and then nothing around it and maybe a plaque.
That, I think, hit me harder than the Somme, because the Somme, they're ultimately fighting pretty much farmland and just kind of open space.
That's why I always think of Belgium as just being that, like, hey, it's that empty lot in the neighborhood that the kids go to fuck around in. I'm not saying that about Belgium. That's just how, from a warfare perspective.
You're telling me that Verdun was so bad that there were villages and hamlets and towns that just ceased to exist because of the amount of fire that they took. That's absolutely incredible to me to just think that an entire village is displaced, but not only displaced, just wiped off the map.
Yeah, it's nothing to go back to.
You have to, after the war is over, you have to go basically figure out the geographic coordinates to be like, okay, well, there's a road here, so this must have been where this village was.
Yeah.
We'll throw a plaque up.
It's a Pompeii-ish situation.
Very much so, yeah. So, basically, you have the Germans that are advancing up the hill on this fort. There are two groups of German soldiers that are kind of trying to figure this out. Of course, they're taking light fire, but at the same time, this Fort Douaumont should be dumping holy hell fire down on these Germans. If this thing is fully equipped and there is everything that they believe there would be in Douaumont, they shouldn't be this close.
No. So
you start to get this probative activity at this barbed wire line to where they start being able to cut through this field of barbed wire. I believe it was these two groups that had headed up on the northeast side, cut through the barbed wire. They enter the fort. They were able to enter the fort at this point in time on this northeast side before they even took fire on that side.
So ideally, I guess how this would work is a fort is just a collection of ever-reducing calibers of guns. Yep. You have the big ones that are going to cover distance, take out artillery pieces, things like that. You have smaller ones that are going to be for smaller ranges, lighter pieces of artillery. And then you have the job of everything around the fort or in the most outer portions of the fort of handling infantry and preventing the fort from being overrun. The fort was so understaffed that as these guys are going around and scouting out the fort, they're like, has anyone got fired on yet? Like, are any of the spot, they could see the larger guns, some of the larger gun emplacements going off that were further up the hill built into the top of the hill itself. But they're like, all the other things that should be manned here keeping us out, they don't seem to be in play. And as they sneak in, the way the initial guy gets in, because it's not just like, oh, there's a door, come on in. There are there are areas where there's like holes and stuff like that, but those are usually taken up by machine gun emplacements, things like that, or spotters. He finds that he can get all the way up to the fort, and he's looking, and there's also a moat as well.
Where the drawbridge was probably still down.
Correct, and I think it's a dry moat at that point. They did have a gate on the other side, but he gets through the moat and gets up, and he's like, usually there should be covering machine gun emplacements here that are able to go ahead and take out. I just crossed this completely bare patch of land. He looks in, and there's no one manning these stations. He crawls in through the gun emplacement hole, goes and finds a door, and opens it for the other guys to come in. They end up coming in with him. It's a small crew at this point. I want to say maybe a dozen guys that have actually bought the idea, because this has got to sound crazy to them. This is a French fort. Like the crown jewel.
Yeah.
What do you mean there's not people in here? This is a fucking trap. They're going to pull us inside while we're still a small force, and they're going to kill us all. So he convinces like a dozen guys to come in with him. They get inside, and then most of them are like, this is as far as we go. How are we even inside here?
We can't keep pushing further, right?
We can only be inside here because the French are allowing us inside this fort. So finally, the guy that snuck in initially was like, fine, stay here. He walks around the inside of this giant underground fort complex and finally runs into a room where a crew is running one of the bigger pop-up guns and is just like, hey. And they turn around and he's like, nobody fucking move. And ends up taking these guys prisoner and holds this place until a larger amount of German troops can come in, get into this place, and secure the entire fort without a shot being fired. They said the worst injury was some guy skinned his knee.
He fell down the last stair. He wasn't watching. He tripped over the last stair and he fell down.
Slick rock when he was trying to crawl in through the gun hole or some shit.
Yeah, I saw multiple different numbers. We're going to stick with 25 as far as the French soldiers that were taken prisoner. But how can you even classify this? When Joffrey found out that they took Douaumont, was his first question how or how many guys were there? Because if he knows how many guys are there, there's probably not a lot of question as to how they took it.
Yeah, if you have the answer to that second question, you don't have to ask the first question. I don't know how he expected any different result.
No, yeah. But it was nice because they had already had a barracks set up for people that were staying there. And they kind of, besides the unexploded ordnances that they were going to use to explode it, which probably falling into German hands isn't great at that point in time, it's already just kind of set up for the Germans to set up shop. Mm-hmm. They'll go ahead and move their prisoners back behind their German lines and take care of them. And meanwhile, you just have this place that's kind of a fort that wasn't built for the Germans that's now just a German stronghold.
Yeah, and it's not useful, insanely useful in the sense of like from a position of firepower, because the strength of this fort is of course going to be facing the threat when it's designed. So the backside of it is going to be less defended, which is where the French are going to be coming from. But simply having a place that is underground, defended, where you can send your troops, you can build up forces and everything, having a safe location like that right up against the now, you're technically behind enemy lines as they're moving up. Yeah, that's huge. And you've just like, from a demoralizing standpoint, what's supposed to be the linchpin for this entire area, what's that going to sound like? Like Fort Douaumont protects Verdun. Well, what happens when there's no Fort Douaumont? You can't go back on your word and being like, no, but there's other forts there that also protect this.
Douaumont wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't that big.
It was such a big deal from the propaganda perspective back in Germany. Didn't they let kids out of school?
Yeah, they celebrated it. They celebrated in the streets that Douaumont was taken. And that's just how, in the French mind, that's how important Verdun was, and that's how unimportant Joffre was, that if you're going to reinforce any fort up there, it's probably going to be your crown jewel,
And the closest one of the closest ones to their line.
There was a French counterattack the next day that it failed. It failed so fast on that fort. I'm sure they were running up the hill and they started hearing guns and they all just flipped a 180 and came back down. Because if you have even 60 German soldiers that have that high ground of that fort and you're trying to run uphill, as you said, there's less guns pointing at you, but all it takes is just a slew of Germans up there.
Why can't we take the fort back? Well, I mean, because there's a large area behind the fort where there's nothing really for us to set up defenses. Why aren't there defenses behind the fort? Because the fort was the defense. We weren't supposed to be losing it or getting attacked from the other direction.
You don't have to defend defense. That's not how that works. It's not a double negative situation. On this day, it's such a huge day for the French in so many different ways because you lose Douaumont. Mentally, you're pretty beaten down at that point in time. But the one man who is going to basically change the strategy around Verdun, and I fucking hate this so much. On this same day, Philippe Pétain, the scapegoat, asshole, loser, bitch, just all around bad guy that led the Vichy government as they capitulated and did anything that the Germans wanted. I got to get it all out now just to try to clear the way. Fuck this guy. Fuck the whole Pétain line. Just awful. Ends up taking control of the Second Army that's in Verdun.
I'm just going to you're going to say Philippe Pétain, and then I'm just going to go beep, 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 beep.
I hate this guy so much.
Justifiably so.
Yeah. But upon his arrival, this is even more hilarious. Upon his arrival, because of the cold stagecoaches that he was riding around in the rooms that he was sleeping in were just completely wet and freezing cold, he shows up, and the first night that he's there, he gets diagnosed with double pneumonia. This guy that's supposed to save the French forces at Verdun shows up with something that probably killed a lot of people back then, right? Double pneumonia had to be pretty brutal.
Yeah. And I know we're talking like we're going day by day on this. You have to in the first part of it to kind of explain, but this is going to become a slog to where we're not going to be going through every day of the 10-month period, but you got to kind of establish what's happening during this initial operation judgment or whatever. And I also think that you're probably feeling a little bit more Pétain hate because you have to give him a hand so much during this episode. And that, my friend, is the double-edged dildo of history in which there are so many instances where we learn about these guys when they're in their douchebag phase and how they end themselves. But then we have to go back and say, how was this person ever trusted by their people or ever lauded by their people and they thought that he was doing the right thing? And this is where we find that.
Yeah, we started at the asshole of Pétain, and now we finally reached the pinnacle, the head of Pétain. As Chris just astutely pointed out, there's the reason why Pétain gave the French hope during World War II, and it was because of what he did in World War I at Verdun. He was known at this point in time for putting a pretty heavy emphasis on protecting his troops. And how pumped are the troops going to be when they hear that a guy has their hopes and dreams for a future in mind that's showing up there? He ended up commanding from bed for like the first week that he was there because of this double pneumonia. They were holding all of these meetings in a room where he was potentially, there was a point in time where like, touch, go, dead, alive. Every morning that they showed up and Pétain was alive, the French were like, cool, we got a chance.
There's literally a priest waiting outside the door, and someone has to do a check where they look inside and they look at the priest, and they're just like, hold on a second. Okay, not yet. He's still breathing.
He's coughing up a ton of shit, but he's still alive. After this show up of Pétain, things just change. Everything changes the way that the French fight this.
How many days in was it until Pétain got the...
I believe it was 4 days that he showed up. I think he showed up on the 25th. Bombardment started on the 21st.
So at least they saw, they're like, Joffrey ain't doing shit. Throw Pétain in, let's see what he can come up with. And he kind of, well, he doesn't hit the ground running. He hits the bed for a few days or weeks or whatever it was. But
how comfortable is Pétain rolling in knowing that he replaced Driant that potentially could have died from French artillery fire himself?
he probably stays back. I would imagine he doesn't put himself in that position going forward. But he recognizes pretty early on that despite the type of ground that the Germans have made up at this point, this is going to turn into just like Falkenhayn. Falkenhayn, am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Wants, it's going to become an attrition type thing. And he comes up with this thing called is it the Noria or the water wheel system? And he begins to institute this troop rotation at Verdun that we talked about a little bit earlier in the episode, where when, battle groups, or however you want to say it, get down to about 50% operational strength, he replaces them with these other troops that are being moved up and pulls them off, lets them recover and everything.
Yeah, his system's brilliant too, because I believe was it 10-day rotations?
That sounds about right.
So 10 days, everybody that was in the front trench on the front line spends up there. The next 10 days, they're moved back to the second trench. And then there's a 10-day raiding period that they're pulled back behind off of the lines to be able to rest and recuperate. Mm-hmm.
Is it Joffrey that has the problem with this way of doing things? Because he doesn't want the troops that he has in reserve to be essentially mentally fucked up by Verdun before he's able to get them to the Somme to launch that offensive.
Yeah, well, and it's just the more troops that are put into rotation at Verdun are the less amount of troops that can go up to the Somme.
Correct.
So Joffrey's sitting back there like, no. These are offensive troops. And Pétain's like, well, we're not technically playing offense, but we can't play offense or defense if they've already taken this. Mm-hmm. So if you guys want shit for the Somme, and there's points, we'll talk about when the Somme starts, the amount of disappointment that the French troops had to go to the Somme, and the understanding of the German troops to be like, sorry, boys, you're headed off to the Somme. This is going to suck dick for you guys for a very long time. Hopefully we see you back here.
Which is crazy that there was even that ability for any type of communication, which it did actually occur. I don't know if it was done by signs or something like that, but to know that at this point on the Western Front, once the Somme does kick off, we're still a couple months away from that if you see a unit leaving and getting pulled off, that that that's where they're heading, because there ain't another place that they can be being sent other than the Somme. That's pretty nuts.
Well, Verdun becomes the story of France because it is the story of French soldiers. What was the number of the amount of troops that fought at Verdun for the French? 78%?
It was, yes. God, I thought I wrote it down somewhere here. I probably did. But it was 3/4. It was 75. 3/4 of everybody in the French army that was still alive at the end of World War I had served at Verdun, which means that if you're in a room and you're with 3 other soldiers, you and at least 2 other guys statistically would be able to sit there and talk about exactly what happened in your experience.
Or you're going to be the one guy that the other 3 can shit on about not being at Verdun.
Yeah, unless you were at the Somme the entire time.
Yeah, true. That'll bolster your
And then
reputation.
Even then, you probably don't talk much.
No, you're just sitting and listening. But that's when you get all of these soldiers returning home, you can say that everybody fought in the same war, but to be able to compare stories from being in the same battle with 75% of the guys that make it home.
Yeah.
That's how you bring a battle like Verdun to the front of the history of France, because there's so many people that can tell that story. So yeah, to get back to Dickhead Pétain, these 4 tenets, this troop rotation, this water wheel that Chris is talking about is the first tenet. And what's that going to do for the morale of those guys to know, hey, you got 10 days on that front line, and then you got 10 days on the second line, and then there's 10 days where there's a great chance nobody's going to kill you. You have a 10-day window in a month where your chance of death is reduced to almost none.
So fight fucking hard for that 10 days.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, bring this back around. Morale boost pretty much immediately. Also, Pétain had this belief, and we talked about this a ton during the de Gaulle episode, because Pétain, spoiler alert, de Gaulle gets wounded at Verdun in World War One.
Mm-hmm.
This is where this happens. And Pétain is this kind of leading figure for de Gaulle throughout this whole time.
He's so fucking tall, he couldn't duck down in the trenches.
Yeah, that was what it was. He got his nose winged by a bullet, and they brought him off. But Pétain had this belief as he was climbing the ranks in the military that firepower was seen as the main offensive threat for war.
Yeah.
This wasn't just loading guys up on cavalry anymore and sending them out, whereas the French are like, Pétain's moving up the ranks, but this whole heavy artillery thing's pretty crazy. I'm sure by the time Pétain got there and said this, the French had already come around and been like, the Germans, we saw what they did with it. Maybe Pétain's onto something. Maybe that's why they brought him in.
Philippe, you were saying?
Yeah, come in and do this. So Pétain immediately was like, okay, well, we have the artillery here. It's not a lot. We have the West Bank that can still fire on the East Bank. But for now, instead of firing all of our heavy artillery trying to knock out their guns, let's position our heavy artillery just to fire into the German soldiers that are advancing.
Yeah.
If we can stop them from being confident in moving on our positions by firing artillery down where they're marching, they're probably not going to be as excited to come close.
Let's give ourselves a little breathing room.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's give a little buffer zone between us and their forces, and then we can start working on the heavy stuff.
Yeah, his third tenet, supply and logistics. This makes so much sense. He organizes this massive truck system. This is a time when he's looking at these horses and carriages like, this shit's not going to work. It's slowing up traffic. Let's start bringing in these trucks as much as possible for ammo, for food, getting these men to the front lines, because as we're bringing these new battalions in, we have to get them to the front as soon as possible to relieve everybody. This would become known as the voie sacrée. We'll talk about it here in a second. But basically, as this is going on with this logistics system, the front's getting bolstered. It's getting stronger. There's more confidence on a battlefield.
The sacred way.
Yeah. And that's number 4, this defensive strategy of saying, all right, well, we're going to fire on the troops that are advancing. We'll worry about the artillery later, but if we can stop the bleeding now at the front, everything should be better. We're going to let our troops breathe a little bit. He also institutes this pride in the work that they're doing, telling them you're fighting for France. You're not fighting to lose Verdun. You're fighting to save France. It's a complete change of being like, if you lose this, you're done. But if you don't lose this, you're a hero.
Verdun is 160 miles or 260 kilometers from Paris.
Really?
Yeah. So there's definitely a strategic need also to keep Verdun more than just the morale aspect of it. Because this, especially with an area like Verdun, if you're thinking about that and you see how protected it is, do you feel a lot of need to put a lot of defensive stuff between you and Paris?
No. Yeah, that puts, I didn't know that. That puts Verdun in a whole different area code.
Yeah.
Of importance, just to know that they're probably the last major defensive installment before Paris starts to get rained down on. There was I'm sure you probably watched the documentary too. They were talking about later on in the war how the people of Paris were just kind of carrying on. Like there were people out in the streets having fun, and Saturday, all of these parks were filled and people were just out living a normal life. While Verdun is just the only thing that's really holding a deluge of Germans onto Paris.
I want to say that with the howitzers, they said that you could hear those fire about 90 miles away.
Oh my God.
So once those got within a certain range, you were acutely aware that there was something going down around you.
Probably less bike rides in the park going on at that point in time. So, the Voie Sacrée, the sacred road, as Chris said earlier, is a 45-mile or 72-kilometer road where they transported and moved things 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Between February 21st and March 22nd, that we're not there yet too, 600 trucks per day were traveling with 48,000 tons of ammunition, 6,400 tons of supplies, and 263,000 men. If they had 30,000 at the beginning of this, when the first bombardment starts, it's a measurable number, but I'm not going to do the math right now, so I'm just going to say it's immeasurable just how much that brings into the area. all of the horse-drawn traffic on this road was cut off completely. Like, this is not going to be happening anymore. These horse and carriages that are carrying a bunch of artillery, they're going to be moving slow. In March 1916, one truck passed on the Voie Sacrée every 14 seconds.
So if you're one of these crews, because they had a whole bunch of these crews as well that were stationed along the Sacred Way, after artillery strikes would occur, you'd get shell craters and everything like that that were put into this road. You would have these way stations basically all along the road that were prepared to go out to basically just dump gravel. And there was a quarry, I think, especially made for this, that just supplied a constant stream of gravel and filler to where they would just rush out, fill the pothole, and the road would get back to what it was doing. But when this thing was going, imagine sitting there in every 14 seconds, all day, every day, there's a truck going by taking supplies into Verdun.
The guys that are working in the quarry that have just like gone and run out and dropped the dynamite in the side of the hill, and then they're running back, and there's the guy with the plunger there that's ready to push it. It's like 5, 4, 3. And then at 3, you just see this massive explosion from an artillery shell that was fired from the Germans that hits right near the quarry. You're like, did we load the dynamite up wrong? No. We got this set up. Let's go take that gravel from over there. They just made us some gravel for the day. Our job's easier. Thanks, Germany. There were 16 labor battalions that worked 24/7 repairing this road. We were talking about it last night. You're just a guy with a wheelbarrow full of gravel, and you're waiting for the truck to run or drive by, and he heads off, and you're like 14, 13, 12, and you got a shovel that you're just out there trying to dump. You're seeing the headlights coming from the next setup. You're like 9, 8, 7, 6. All right, I got to get off the road. Like, you're just playing Frogger out there.
And you're also walking out there filling a hole with the knowledge that at some point the artillery was dialed in on this exact spot.
Oh, yeah.
And not knowing maybe when they're going to start it back up again. Which, in actuality, that's probably the safest spot for you to actually be in.
Yeah.
Because that spot getting hit twice by that method of bombardment is not likely.
The lightning theory came off of the bombardment theory. Lightning doesn't strike twice in the same area. Shell's probably not going to hit in the same place twice.
Jumping forward just a little bit before we go back, just to continue on like the Sacred Way. So during the summer of 1916, 90,000 men and 50,000 tons of ammo were sent up that every single week.
Jeez.
By the end of it, 2/3 of the entire French army had made the trip on the Sacred Way.
It earns its name for sure. There were 3,500 trucks and 800 ambulances that ran this thing every single day. Anytime a vehicle died, I guess probably not 3,500 trucks a day, but they were just constantly running this. If a vehicle died on the side of the road, it just got moved off to the side and repaired or taken later somewhere else.
Probably 3,500 single trips.
Yes.
And everything.
But that was just how it was. There was no time on the front for them to be sitting there and repairing a truck. This was 2 lanes. This was 1 lane going in, 1 lane going out. And before Pétain had gotten there, this was just 1 lane. So he had to bolster this thing up as much as possible.
It's not a highway. If you look at it, it winds and weaves its way kind of through the countryside. Eventually, they do try to establish and get built or try to kind of like build up the minor railway.
Yes.
They was able to do that. But for a very long time, Verdun only stays in the fight because of this Sacred Way.
Yeah, there were 300 officers and 8,500 men that serviced this road all the time and controlled the traffic for all of these trucks and everything that are going by. The railway that you were just talking about, it moved about 1,800 tons of supplies per day. So we're talking mostly food. Its return trips were pretty much filled with all of the wounded to take them back to Bar-le-Duc. So it was like excited to see, but you know that as soon as it's pulling back into that town, the hospitals
exciting to see where it shows up. The people on the other end, when it gets back to where it is, not a good sight.
You're just there. The fighting on the East Bank is starting to slow. French artillery firing from the west is calming down a lot of what's going on by the Germans. And so the Germans now switch the pressure. They've pushed this pressure on the East Bank as much as they can. Now the West Bank needs to be dislodged. You need these French forces that are firing across and hitting you on these heights to be calmed down quite a bit. The West has these hills instead of more of these heights, as we talked about, Côte 304, Dead Man's Hill, all of these high grounds that need to be taken. And each side these were being volleyed back and forth. They fought for control on these hills. They would displace one another constantly. They were going back and forth. Initial German assaults were repelled on May 6th on 304. They had just leveled 304 with a bombardment.
Yeah.
That was their main goal, was to just shrink this hill to where they could get on top of it.
If we take enough off the hill, they wouldn't have dug down deep enough to have stuff. Oh, how many meters did they end up? Was it between 12 and 16 by the end of the battle? The hill itself was 12 to 16 meters lower than it was. So that much natural earth had been displaced by just constant bombardment. Not like you pointed out, where it was just like, oh, there's a couple holes that go down 12 to 16 meters. No. Just wholesale. The top of this hill was lowered. And again, meters, I like to just do 3 feet. It makes it nice and
40
easy.
40 to 50-ish feet.
40 to 50 feet of height reduced on this just from shelling the shit out of it.
So what started as Côte 304 ended up being Côte 260.
Yeah.
At the end of the war. And it's not just German bombardments at that point in time, because it's also the French doing it too.
Yes.
So the Germans might have taken 6 meters off in the first couple weeks, and then the French shaved off another 4 meters.
Everyone had a hand in it. Yeah.
After the war, they're just looking for Hill 304. They're like, there's nothing 304 feet around here. Mm-hmm. It's just gone. Did it disappear? Oh, no. We're standing.
No, you're here.
As that's going on, these massive bombardments are working for the Germans to some point. They are taking it back. They're temporarily holding it on May 7th before it falls back into French hands. But 304 would allow the Germans to attack this West Bank artillery. But they could never achieve full control. When they would get up there, they would make hay, but they were so solely focused on trying to knock everything out on the East Bank that they would just get crept up on, and they would have to be pushed right back down the hill. And there was a lot of this time where if they were running up on abandoned French artillery pieces, they were just turning them in the direction that they could use them and firing them back.
Yeah.
So there was also a point in time when the French were taking these areas back. Had they moved German artillery up there and had been able to get them off the hills, the French were also utilizing the German artillery on themselves.
Man, their stuff is actually pretty good.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, as far as shell size or anything like that, is that just an exercise in experimentation, trying to figure out what you have to fit that gun?
I think you're pretty familiar with, you're also just like, okay, did they make this easy? Did they leave the stuff in the boxes with the German on it? Or
yeah. You just got some guy up there with a list of instructions in German trying to figure out how to fire it.
I feel it's a situation where, like, during the heat of battle, if you're just scrambling for ammo, that's where it gets a little bit dicey, where you might grab the wrong thing.
Could be. March 9th, the attack on Dead Man's Hill starts. By March 14th, they had captured the west end of Mortholme. By March 30th, the German casualty count on the West Bank hit 20,000. So if you're saying that they moved over onto the West Bank probably like mid to early March, say the beginning of March.
March also sees the kickoff of the use of chemical weapons, which this is something that I don't know if we've gone super in depth on, even during the overview for World War I, is this war was just kind of no holds barred. It was like, oh, can you develop it? Can you come up with it? Fuck it, use it. It hasn't been used before, so there's no rule against it. So, and this takes place on both sides of it. So, chemical warfare, March 1916, there were 3 to 4 main types of chemical weapons that were used. The first one was chlorine gas, and this was launched in artillery through shells for dispersal. And again, chlorine gas, first used by Germany, was a greenish yellow color. It would attack the eyes, throat, lungs, and it caused suffocation as victims drowned in their own fluids. You would have phosgene gas. It's like chlorine gas, but often smelled like fresh mown hay and had a delayed effect. So if they launched it and it was in the area, usually if you would get that first little whiff of chlorine gas, you'd try to throw your gas mask on. You try to get the fuck out of the area. Instead, with this phosgene gas, you'd be sitting there and you're like, smells like back home, smells like the farm. And you'd be sitting there. And if you didn't know what that was, because this might be brand new that's being used, it doesn't really set off any alarm bells in your head that this slightly decent smelling aroma is doing anything horrible to you, when in actuality, it's basically keeping you there within the gas, continuing to have it, you breathe it in. So then it's already going to have a more debilitating effect on you. You're not giving yourself an opportunity to get away from this stuff. Mustard gas, which was sulfur mustard, would cause severe burns and blisters on the skin, eyes, and the respiratory tracts, and disabled or killed a lot of people that even had masks on, because it would affect essentially just getting on you and touching your skin.
If it's doing that much damage to your skin, imagine the soft innards of your body, your lungs.
And there's a reason that in World War II, it was, well, I can't say gas wasn't used, but as far as from a battlefield perspective, there were attempts. I think we talked about Battle of the Bulge. They found caches, didn't they, of certain chemical weapons that they thought they might use in desperation during that time?
The Germans didn't take anything off the table. The rules of engagement had changed, obviously, after World War I to World War II, but that doesn't mean that the Germans weren't willing to use...
Correct. They didn't do it until it seemed like the last desperate stand, where rules of civility were no longer even something to be considered. But for the longest time, gas was seen to be so horrible that it wasn't even used in World War II to that degree.
And it's because they saw what happened during World War I.
But it was used a lot during World War
I. Just so nasty. In total, on the German side, by March 30th, they had lost 81,607 total. We haven't talked a whole lot about the French losses so far, and it's because of the initial bombardments and the way that things happened on the Eastern Bank. There were just French bodies that were strewn across the fields that they weren't bringing in. There were areas that they were talking about walking on the battlefield where soldiers said that they had to walk on the backs of dead soldiers because they would just sink into the mud to the point to where they couldn't pull themselves out and they could die there too.
They also said they had to walk on the backs specifically because if they were to step on the stomachs of them, because of the decay and everything like that, their feet would go right through the bodies.
That's just what this battlefield looked like.
We're in like March.
Yeah.
Still at this point. And this has been going on since February 21st. There hasn't been time to really take stock of the situation and worry about the dead that are out there. The dead that are currently in the trenches that guys are living on top of. The disease that's spreading at this point. The rats that are eating the dead bodies that are in the trenches where these guys are trying to live. It's not late into this thing, and it still goes all the way to December.
Yeah. They said that they had found bodies that had drowned inside of crater holes that had then filled with rain as they were in and couldn't escape them.
Yeah.
That was how deadly this battlefield was, that you didn't have to be in a trench. You could just be out there hiding solely by yourself in this crater hole. And if you get stuck in that mud and it starts raining, there's a chance that you're just going to drown in a hole.
There was some like letters that had been written back talking about everything. The guys would be, in the trench. They would, be popping their heads out, and they were like, just as far as kind of you could see, you would just see bodies. And closer to the trench, there might be a little bit more of a consolidation of them where they were taken out right when they first tried to go over the wall, but then they would spread out. But one of the dudes was talking about one night that he thought he had woken up and thought like there was some type of monster like haunting him or something like that. And it ended up being a horse that was outside the trench that had been blown up, and its skeleton, like the skin had been peeled back, and it was all like pointing up toward the sky.
Pretty scary.
Oh,
Monster-like, you would say.
But again, this may not have the trench warfare element that the Somme does, because there's areas that they can fall back to the forts to Verdun and everything. But this still is a huge instance of trench warfare happening.
Yeah. It's not the traditional, if you take a trench, you're moving up on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
It's just more of a, these are there where chaos is happening inside of. EVF, Falkenhayn starts faltering on some of these offensive ideas. And by the 10th of May, German operations kind of became limited to these local attacks or just reprisals on these French counterattacks. There wasn't the big movement of land that they were taking before by May. So February, into February, March, and April, you have all of this going on. By May, Falkenhayn's like, shit, my whole idea is...
He hit the attrition step much further in the process that he had hoped to hit it. And now he's part of the attrition process as well. He's dealing with the same thing.
And the work done by Pétain at this point in time catches the attention of the French government, and that becomes a pretty big issue for Joffre, because Joffre doesn't like seeing the way Pétain is running things successfully. It's kind of an affront to his job. And Joffre, being somebody who wants to go on the offensive, he's just chomping at the bit for the Somme to happen, sees that Pétain is in this defensive strategy, and you can't fire a guy that's saving Verdun single-handedly. So you're going to have to be able to get him out of your purview enough to be able to do what you want. Pétain ends up being moved because he couldn't be fired. He's promoted to the commander of the Central Army Group. And this is at the beginning of May. He ends up being replaced by this guy. His name was General Robert Nivelle. And Nivelle was very offensive-minded. He ends up replacing him on the as the commanding officer of the Second Army at Verdun. And Nivelle's first thought's like, well, Douaumont's necessary for us to get back. We need to start gearing up as much effort as we can to try to get Douaumont back.
Douaumont had its own little thing that it was going through in May when there was a huge explosion. And again, this is when the Germans are currently in possession of it. I want to say a cooking fire got a little out of control, spread to flamethrower supplies, which were then close enough to ammunition and explosives that when everything went up, it was this huge explosion that I think ended up instantly killing somewhere between 650 to 700 German soldiers.
Pretty bad little self-inflicted bomb that goes off there.
It's too bad that you're not in a position after that goes off and you see that explosion. The French aren't close enough to be like, so this is definitely an opportunity for us to go and attack, while they're kind of, dealing with this whole explosion inside the fort type thing.
They got their own things going on.
They just weren't in that type of position. And
No.
I think, like you were saying with Nivelle, the way that Nivelle was looking at it, the way that Joffre was looking at it is like, hey, yeah, we lost some ground during the initial assault, but we've actually been holding them pretty firm at this point. And Pétain's like, yeah, because of what I've been doing.
Yeah.
Like it's my way that's been working for this. He's like, yeah, but at this point, you've done your job. You've stopped them. Now we need to go back on the offensive and start pushing them back.
And one of Nivelle's first pushes begins May 22nd. This French counterattack that's led by General Mangin to take back Douaumont. And it goes terribly wrong. Even after this explosion inside this, the French take 6,400 casualties in just a matter of days as they fail to retake this fort.
But they wish they could have had those type of casualties that they inflicted before they lost the fort.
Yeah. It's maybe you don't lose the fort if you have an extra 6,400 people there, huh?
Imagine what you could have done that the Germans coming into a fort that's not even theirs, using the side of the fort that's not even as well defended as the front side, are able to inflict 6,400 casualties on you in a matter of days. Man, it's crazy to think what a fully staffed fort could have done to the Germans pointed the other direction.
Instead of the Germans having to play Marco Polo in Douaumont to find the French.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. German attacks shift back to the east pretty quickly once they start to see how this whole thing is playing out with the offense starting from the French side. They shift back to the east. They end up reaching the last defensive line at Fleury. And we're going to talk about Fleury later. Fleury doesn't exist anymore. Just as a little point of reference. Fleury is a place.
Don't try to look it up.
No, I believe it's a place they have like a mayor, but they're the only town in France that has a mayor and has zero population.
It's a very easy job.
Yeah, he's not too worried about budgets. June 1st, there's an assault on Fort Vaux, that other one that we were talking about that's kind of tucked, would you say, like the 5 o'clock? Almost on the map?
I believe so.
Somewhere in there. Vaux gets run up on by 10,000 German troops. They capture the fort by June 2nd. So this is about 24 hours that it takes 10,000 German troops to attack Vaux. 574 French troops were run out of water underground in this fort. So again, 574 troops sounds a hell of a lot more than the 20-ish that were sitting in Douaumont. But 574 troops to run this fort that's supposed to be kind of your second best fort doesn't feel like a whole lot.
You have so much room for more.
Well, you're also talking about them running out of water. So clearly this fort wasn't stocked. As much as Pétain tried to stock the front lines, apparently the resupplying of this area was pretty low on the totem pole. All 574 end up surrendering. Their next move would be on to Fort Souville. And Souville is kind of the last bastion of the forts for the French. It's a very important fort for them to keep a hold of. I know we keep talking about how important these forts are and how fast they fall, but Souville is finally when the French pull their heads out of their asses. And they were probably helped out again by Mother Nature because there were heavy rains that slowed the German advance on Souville. It would be the site of attacks and counterattacks for the next 2 months. This is 2 months worth of fighting in this same area. Again, we're talking about June, so February, March, April, May, June, 5 months. The next 2 months are going to take place in this area around Souville.
And I mean, it's important because it is directly in line with Verdun. There is a small fort called Fort Michid or something between Fort Souville and Verdun. So as they lose the forts ahead, each one behind becomes that much more important.
Yeah. Well, and they said, I believe, after they had taken Vaux, the Germans were able to look down into Verdun and see the bell tower. So that's how close things were getting to losing Verdun. June 23rd, German forces pushed in to reach the village of Fleury. And again, Fleury becomes so important out of this whole thing because if you have 2 months of attacks and counterattacks on this fort, these villages are going to be kind of up for grabs pretty much all the time.
Yeah, there's a direct line. If you're moving directly toward Verdun from the German lines, it literally goes Vaux, Souville, this smaller fort, Verdun. So yeah, as they lose each of these, there's going to be a huge push to try to reinforce the one behind it.
And luckily enough, we get... I'm not going to take a shot at Tolkien here. I'm not going to say that Tolkien maybe stole a little bit from World War I.
Oh, he did.
Okay, you think it was pretty intentional?
Oh, buddy, his entire thing. So Tolkien was at the Somme, I believe.
Oh, really?
Because there were no Brits here.
Okay.
But I do believe that, yeah, because there was the famous saying that they shall not pass. That's definitely something that would have been that's like a remember the Alamo rallying cry during World War II. That's got to be something that was across every single paper. But yeah, Tolkien 100% based a lot of things, Sauron, all that kind of stuff off the opposing forces. And then the Fellowship was supposed to be like the group of soldiers that he served with and everything, one of which he was like the last survivor of it. Yeah, there's a lot to his experiences in World War I that kind of go into the works of like Middle-earth.
Yeah, but June 23rd, Nivelle finally puts his foot down and he says the famous line, "You will not let them pass, my comrades." This is Nivelle looking back over his shoulder and seeing Verdun as he's standing in Seville. He's like, oh, too close, no more. We will not let them pass. June 4th, jumping back a little bit, we have something that is probably in the back of the German mind at all times. The Brusilov offensive begins on the Eastern Front as the Austro-Hungarian Empire is just crumbling. So all of those forces that Falkenhayn was holding in reserve are now going to start dwindling because they need reinforcements in these other places. And 20 days later, June 24th, you have these Somme offensive bombardments beginning. Much like the amount of shelling that happened during the first round of Verdun, you have 1.5 million shells that are fired in the first week. Now, when we heard that number, 1.5 million shells in the first week, we were flabbergasted by that at the Somme, right? And during, what was it, the first 10 hours of Verdun, the Germans hucked up 1 million pieces.
That's why they knew they could do it at the Somme and everything, because, they had already done something close to it at Verdun.
Yeah, so the Somme offensive kicks off, and you have Falkenhayn's worst case scenarios coming.
During this entire time, the people that are in different... Von Falkenhayn has people that are under him that are putting a lot of pressure on him. The Kaiser's probably also looking at this saying, hey, remember how you said that you're going to bleed the French white? So what are our casualties looking like? And he's giving them the number, and he's like, but I can assure you, we have seen so many other French units pulled off the line that based upon the losses that we take before we pull someone off the line, we got to be killing them 4-1. It's only going to be a matter of time before, we'll keep making headway. They're throwing guys into the meat grinder. Don't worry about it. You also now have guys behind Falkenhayn being like, but are they? Are they losing that many people? And now you have Brusilov offensive going on the Eastern Front. You now have the Battle of the Somme that's going on further up in, Belgium and everything. And these other guys are starting to kind of get the ear of the Kaiser being like, we need a different route here. He's had his time. He's had months at this point. And what does he have to show for it? What does he have? Like 5 miles, 5 or 6 miles?
Somewhere along there. Yeah. So at the end of May, and this number kind of jumped out at me, casualties on the French side reached 185,000. Huge number. In June, right at the beginning of June, when the German casualty count came in, they had reached about 200,000. So at this point in time, that whole, 4-1, that number is so far off that at this point, the German casualties had actually outpaced the French casualties, which, of course, if you're going to be moving in on defensive positions, that's kind of to be expected. Now, if you're thinking 4-1 and you're telling me that Falkenhayn looked at that number and was like, okay, well, we have 200,000. So that means that the French have lost almost 1 million. They have to be sitting at 800,000, right? Just bad denial of the math. The hamlet of Fleury that we've kind of been dancing around on would change hands on 16 different occasions during the Battle of Verdun. That was how many times this place was won and lost.
And you know that some of those, it's not just averaging over that period of time saying every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks this thing changed hands. Maybe on average, but there had to be instances where someone marched in, forced the opposing forces out, held it for 2 days, didn't have enough time to get their footing, and the other side pushed it back out of their hands and had it, less than a week later.
Breakfast was schnitzel and dinner was brie cheese and wine.
Yeah.
It was just
sometimes when they left, the food was still warm by the time they got back.
Yeah, Fleury is gone at this point in time. I can imagine that was probably a pretty foregone conclusion to know that it changed hands 16 different times. The furthest that the German army would end up advancing into this area would be Chapelle Saint-Fine. At that point in time, once they reach there, the French begin walking back the German forces. The German offensive is effectively over at this point in time. And we talk about the casualties at this point in time. Fleury is captured August 18th for the last time. This is August 18th. is when the German offensive is effectively over, and we still have until December.
And this is where you get into the really boring logistics of the matter, where you're like, well, how did they advance so much during that first initial stage? Then it got bogged down. Look how far you are from your base, of where you're getting resupplied, of where your soldiers are coming in. There's just more of a distance between Germany, of where their base is, of where they're sending people from, of where they're sending their artillery from, to get up to Verdun or the lines are. The French are just like, Paris is 160 miles back. So we definitely have a lot of shit that we can just continually to pump into this region that's much closer for us to get to. And it does become a war of attrition. It's just not how von Falkenhayn wanted. Initially, if he wants to go back and look at his numbers and say, okay, von Falkenhayn, answer for yourself, he can point at the numbers and say, well, technically the French did lose more people than we did. So yeah, my whole attrition thing definitely worked out, but it's so close. Like we said, 10% of what the actual discrepancy between the two were. At that point, it's negligible.
Yep. Yeah, it's not you're not hanging your hat on
You don't
that.
get to use the term attrition when it comes to those numbers.
No, it's the story with war, the story with advancing on a battlefield always comes down to the exact same sentence. That's how fast does your supply train keep up with your front? Because you can be great. It's a story as old as time in Germany, and we've seen it in so many different places. Your front can move at a lightning pace, but if there isn't enough resupply coming in to be able to catch up there, what is your advancement doing besides putting you out on an island?
It doesn't matter how effective a certain unit is, a certain army is. If you are taking out of their hands the tools or not providing them what they need that provides them that effectiveness, they're just not going to be effective. Or if you give the opposition time to then become as effective as you are, that's when you get the stalemate.
Your train will show up eventually, but is your train going to show up to a front that's conducive to you continuing to move forward?
Is it still going to be your front? Yeah.
Germany saw the writing on the wall. They knew that it was probably over for Falkenhayn. August 29th, Falkenhayn is replaced as chief of the general staff by Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff. So you get these two World War II clowns showing up to try to basically fix what was going on in Falkenhayn's situation.
It's so crazy how small this circle is. When we go back and we talk about historical names that led to certain rises, that led to certain circumstances in history, Pétain gets his name here. Pétain is the one that essentially convinces the French people that, hey, we should just let the Nazis occupy us. We'll keep our French way of life down here in Vichy, France, and everything will be hunky-dory. And he had done enough and built up enough trust in the French people during the Battle of Verdun that they looked at him and said, he's definitely got to know about what battle is and about what losses are, because they don't know enough about Verdun to question that. So they're saying, yeah, he helped us and he got us, where we were, where we needed to be in Verdun. We obviously got to trust him here that he's saying that it'll lead to the death of, this many people. And in his eyes, I'm trying to understand the thought process where if I'm looking at him as not a historical asshole, like we've discovered him to be, I'm saying, man, he probably saw a lot of people die. A lot of Frenchmen die. Saw what happened during the invasion of France, saw the million captured French troops and said, how many guys did we just lose during World War I? Can we afford to lose these guys? No, we're just going to play ball with the Nazis. But then at the same time, you're fucking playing ball with the Nazis.
Yeah, there becomes a certain line of how deep are you going to be embedded with this German front that 20 years ago you were fighting against. 25 years ago, these were trying to kill you.
And now on the other side, we have Ludendorff coming in. Who's the other German dude?
Paul von Hindenburg.
Paul von Hindenburg, who's the chancellor of Germany at the time of fucking Adolf's rise, who basically just keeps being like, it's fine, guys. It's fine. Let him do what he wants to do. It's fine. It's fine. I'm still in control until I'm not in control.
In my look at it with Hindenburg and Ludendorff is, if you're going to believe this whole They brought in the new government. The new government capitulated. That's how we lost World War One. If Ludendorff and Hindenburg are both still in charge at the time that you lose World War One, how are they holding their weight in Germany to have Hindenburg in a spot to put Hitler where he was, and then Ludendorff in a spot to get all of this acclaim? Are they still living off that first Eastern Front win?
We just had to do what the Kaiser said. We were hamstrung by whatever the Kaiser allowed us to do. And then again, this is where the blame game comes in and says, hey, this is why we actually lost World War One. And again, with that German populace not really knowing because of media and the spread of information not being what it was, or not being what it is today, you have these people looking at von Hindenburg and Ludendorff and saying, well, these guys said that we didn't really lose the war, that it was just due to some unfortunate circumstances why we actually had to surrender. And so those guys to you just seem trustworthy, which is why when you get one of them as your spokesman and then one of them just basically being like, no, it's okay, the Nazis are fine, Adolf's fine, everything like that, you're looking at those people and saying, well, he said it's fine.
Maybe my general misunderstanding is just a character with both of these guys.
Like, how do you not assign, hey, we lost, these guys were in charge when we lost, how do we not connect the dots?
Yeah, and that's where I started, but the way that you just explained it, it comes down to character flaws with Ludendorff and Hindenburg. That was it their axe to grind that they were that high that they were able to push this giant lie that Hitler was telling everybody to get another chance at redemption?
People didn't know enough to question them, I think.
But they did. They knew how World War One ended.
Well, yeah, but if they saw a way for them to stay in power.
That's what I mean. That's the only thing that I can see to be like, well, the Germans were stupid. It wasn't the Germans were that stupid. It was that Hindenburg and Ludendorff both were able to put away the actual truth in hopes that this lie brings them back to greatness.
There was a narrative that they put out, and they had the tools in which to disperse that narrative much more effectively than the other one.
Yeah, it's an insane thing to say, knowing what these two guys ushered in, but turns out that Hindenburg and Ludendorff were very bad guys.
Yeah.
By September 2nd, this is hilarious to me because August 29th is when von Hindenburg and Ludendorff come into power. By September 2nd, less than a week, Hindenburg orders an end to all major German offensive at Verdun. So he walked in, got a couple days worth of numbers, like, we can't keep doing this. We got to call this off. This is before us.
Yeah.
We got to try to turn the page on this pretty quickly.
It's like cleaning out the new management comes in. They just get rid of any current projects that the previous management was working on and then start fresh. Because again, there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to turn that thing around. They know it's not going well. And so there's much more risk on their part to try to continue in a failing effort than to just say, nope, this was von Falkenhayn's baby. We're nixing it at this point, and we're going to go with these other offensives or strategies that we think will work.
It gave the French, I think, a pretty good amount of breathing room because the next major event starts to take place on October 20th. So you have about a month and a half's worth of time before the French begin their first offensive Battle of Verdun, the first legitimate offensive, not counterattacks, not, trying to the art of surprise or anything like that. This is the first full-fledged offensive of Verdun takes place October 20th. They open again, 6-day bombardment. They launch 855,264 shells. I hope that they counted them all, and that number is very accurate. But this is a taste of their own medicine they're giving the Germans at this point in time. This is where you start to see the French brilliance. And the reason that I say brilliance is because Chris and I have worked pretty hard on figuring this out, but they come up with this plan for artillery sound ranging, and it's so fucking cool. So during their bombardment stoppages, and this was something that Pétain it took a page out of Germany's book at this point in time. They would run their bombardments, then they would stop, The Germans believing that the bombardment was going to be followed by a massive rush of French troops coming down the hill.
As it normally does.
Yes. Pétain, who was still in contact with Nivelle, that kind of pointed Nivelle in the right direction after what happened at Douaumont the first time they tried to retake it, says, hey, keep the guys back after the bombardment. Let's just see what happens on the German side. As soon as the bombardment's halted, the Germans just start raining hell back towards the French.
They're trying to cover that area right in front of the French line that they expect that people are going to be rushing out of the trenches. And they're anticipating just being like, it's going to be business as usual. They fired, they charge, we fire, we kill their chargers.
The French had spotters that were out at the front of the battle that had a pretty good visual of where the artillery was firing from as far as
they had experience.
Flashes.
They had been in that position for a while, probably.
It's seen this play out quite a bit. For this artillery sound ranging that they would do, these spotters would start to see the muzzle flashes, and they would turn on these arrays of, I believe it was 6 microphones.
Yeah, so the guy sitting there watching basically had a button. And as soon as he saw a muzzle flash, he would basically press this button, which would activate this system. The simplest way I can think of it, it's a recording system. He would basically press record on this system. Now, he would see the flashes, but the sound, as it traveled, it's traveling in a concentric, or like a wave, essentially. And these microphones placed behind the lines would pick up the sound of the fire, or the sound of the, howitzer or cannon, whatever it was, at different times, depending on when that ring of sound actually hit it. Again, sound travels so fast, there would be just little discrepancies, but as these microphones picked it up, you would have a polygraphish type thing.
Seismometer, kind of.
That was marking something on film. Again, this is complex shit. We don't understand it. We're trying to simplify it down.
1916.
And so as it made these little blips, or like the little scratch marks as you see on like a polygraph test, it would have them based upon when the microphone picked up the sound. So you would have, let's say you have a ring of microphones. They fire a shot from your right-hand side. And we're counting the microphones from left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Number 6 would probably pick that up first, then 5, 4, 3, 2. And there would be a time delay between when that would be picked up. They would then take that information, and they had some type of calculus on a map that they would say, okay, so here's the graph that goes behind the enemy line that says how much time it was. We draw a line up to that. And as we draw a line from the time that it actually detected it from each microphone, all of those lines converge at a certain point, that point being where the sound came from. That's where you fire.
And it was fairly accurate.
Yes, more accurate than the Germans were.
And so that's the beginning of this shift from Pétain saying, let's use the artillery to clear out the Germans that are advancing, and start back to, all right, the Germans aren't advancing anymore. Now our main goal is to get rid of the artillery. If we can get rid of the artillery, we can keep moving our people in. And this sound ranging that sounds so advanced for 1960.
It's French witchcraft.
Yeah, pretty much. Was accurate enough to be able to start sighting in some of these artillery shots. And as we were talking about before, if you were hit with a direct shot from artillery shell, it was just a pretty bad day. But if you have 16 German artillery guns that have, say, a 6 to 8 foot circle that they're all trying to fire on, one of those guns is going to get real close to that circle.
They're aiming for that, but they're, like I said, smaller guns were aiming for, like, think of it like multiple football field size.
Yeah.
When they're hitting the big ones, like the howitzers, like the Big Bertha, they're basically just being like, where's the city at? And they're like, well, it's this area. And they're like, perfect. Just, we're going for a city-sized area that we're trying to land this thing in.
It's just this French brilliance to be able to pull this stuff off.
But what's going to happen too, you don't have to necessarily hit their artillery. You just have to present the threat that it's going to be hit. So if you can determine a specific area where that certain batteries are, and you start firing and they see shells start to land within half a mile of that battery, the next round lands a little bit closer, you're not waiting until they get there. You're pulling that shit out while you still have time.
You're coming off the line pretty quickly.
Yes.
You're abandoning ship very fast. October 24th, French forces begin the final operation to retake Douaumont. There were 3 divisions that begin the attack. Of course, this follows artillery fire that was just launched at Douaumont. I wonder what the state of Douaumont was when they finally got back there, realizing that fort to fort battle was definitely probably off the table going forward. So did they really care what Douaumont looked like by the time they got there? Pretty much the worse shape, the better, right?
I mean, not if you're retaking it, I don't think.
No, but you're retaking it with the thought of we're never going to have to fight with this thing again.
Yes, to a degree. I think that's accurate.
So they start pounding it with artillery, and by 11:40 in the morning, you have these 3 divisions that start moving up. By the end of the day, there is a partial German retreat that left 6,000 soldiers in the fort. I don't know if they drew straws, but you got to think, if they fit 6,000 people in Douaumont and that's what was left, their retreat was probably pretty big, which again just lends to the fact that the French did not protect this place well enough.
So I'm going to we'll put up a picture of this, like a side-by-side comparison is one of the social posts. But if you look up at the video, bud,
yeah,
up at the projector. So that's Douaumont, like right at the beginning of the battle. So you can clearly see walls or fortifications. You can see where stuff is. It's not super pockmarked or anything like that.
No.
At the end of it, I believe it looks something similar to this, where it, again, the only thing that you can really describe it as a moonscape. It looks like, I mean, Swiss cheese isn't even the right term for it because there's not enough holes in Swiss cheese.
Mm-hmm.
But this thing is like a kid that did not stop picking at his acne.
No. It is so bad. You can see a wall or two, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a nice little side-by-side comparison there.
Yeah, that's
the only way that you can actually tell that this thing was the same place is based upon the shape of it. Other than that, it is complete. It looks like someone just took a rototiller and just ran around it and just churned everything up.
Somebody huffed and puffed and blew the house down.
Jesus.
The French Marines sweep in and end up capturing Douaumont back. It's a great victory for them to be able to get what's left of Douaumont back. For the next week, again, after that, you're talking about stepping up even further. The next week, I guess it's further, but it's also just in a different area. For the next week, the French just bombard the shit out of Fort Vaux. They absolutely tried to destroy it and wipe it off the map, knowing that the Germans are still holding it. Of course, it's being held at a different position kind of further back, but it's because that the line is... What was... Not the bulge.
Oh, a salient?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The salient had wrapped around to where Vaux was back at a different location.
Yeah.
Vaux suffers a very, very similar fate. Where did I have it?
It basically just becomes a piece of land in the same way that Douaumont does.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of the war, let's just say that they have very little faith in forts going forward to where these places are not even remotely attempted to be rebuilt.
Yeah, that was it. So they spent a week firing on Vaux. November 2nd, the Germans are like, not worth it. We're not going to hold on to it. The French,
fine, take it.
The French infantry enters Fort Vaux and retakes it without firing a shot or seeing a German.
That's actually the better part of it.
Yeah. Yep. They didn't have to bring a gun. They could have brought a goddamn stick and a wheel in there just to have fun because there was not one German round that was going to be fired on them. By November 5th, the French had reached the former February 24th front line.
And so, again, that's pushed back quite a bit from the original pre-Battle of Verdun line, but that is that pretty sizable swath of territory that the Germans were able to capture very quickly. So now at this point, we're not even seeing they haven't recaptured all of the territory, but the way it's trending is they're moving in that direction.
The writing's on the wall.
Yes.
It's right there for them. And I think they know it at that point. Operations are suspended until December. I don't know if that's weather, just like, hey, we got this stuff back. Let's get prepared for the final push.
We've blown up every fort that they've taken. There's no place for them to winter.
Yeah. The second Verdun offensive takes 2 days. It begins after another 6-day barrage. 1.169 million shells get dropped in this bombardment. The final push reclaims all of the land that was lost over the entire Battle of Verdun. So this big Falkenhayn plan of taking Verdun that takes 303 days ends where it begins.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess the Somme can hold on to them taking like an extra kilometer of land or some shit like that at the end of it.
The Somme would have creamed in their pants had they heard that they could advance anywhere near a mile in any amount of time.
Yeah, Verdun, the longest battle of World War I, begins and ends in the exact same place.
Mm-hmm.
So total casualties on the German side, and this is where Falkenhayn's battle of attrition really starts to rear its ugly head as maybe some revisionist history. The German side ends up losing between 336,000 and 355,000 casualties. They claim that there's 143,000 killed. Again, these are all German numbers that we really truly have no idea.
Yeah.
I would assume that the numbers were quite high, mostly higher considering where they were when we were talking about May and June. The French side was anywhere between 380,000 to 400,000 casualties with 163,000 killed. We have a more accurate number with 216,000 wounded. But it just goes to show that Falkenhayn trying to paint the picture of, I'm not going for this war of attrition. I'm not trying to actually bleed them white, but when I write in my diaries what needs to happen, it's going to look a whole lot better than me being in this mode of not trying to start total war.
This is a circumstance of Van Falkenhayn seeing the end of the numbers, and someone comes up to him and been like, didn't you say something about like bleeding the French white? He's like, no, I didn't say that. What actually happened, if you look at the numbers, is that we lost less people than the French, and the French did not take any land from Germany. Yeah, but weren't you supposed to take some stuff from them? You know what? You know what? It's not important.
Technically, we only launched one offensive, and they had to launch 2 offensives.
Mm-hmm. I tied them up for 10 months.
Yeah, everybody at the Somme can thank me for keeping all these French troops down here that are super soldiers and not up there in the Somme, because we would have lost twice as much of the 10 meters of land that we lost in the Somme had I let the French up there. It blows me away. And every time we do a World War I episode, the number of casualties is just, it's so hard to comprehend what goes on. But it's because exactly what we talked about. The artillery was just disgusting at this point in time.
It's such a small area too. Like when we talk about these casualties, again, keep in mind the entirety of the Battle of Verdun area that's considered is 100 square miles. But for the most part, somewhere between 8 and 37 square miles is where the nitty-gritty horrible shit really happens and where you get the most number of these casualties. So it's different from talking about, World War II, where it's like, well, this town was taken out by bombers over the course of this period of time. There was 500,000 dead all over northern France. And you're like, well, actually in Verdun, there was close to that many wounded or whatever. But that took place within 37 square miles.
Those numbers pale in comparison to the Somme.
Yeah.
So
it's a death per area type calculation.
And the types too. By World War II, they'd figured out a better way to do flamethrowers. That was more of a concise practice because in World War I, during Verdun, they found out that the French are looking at these Germans with a bunch of gas attached to their backs, thinking, well, I don't got to kill him. I just got to hit one of those canisters behind him.
Like, what if we took the canisters of gas and just put them into a bomb and dropped them out of an airplane and had incendiary stuff? Oh, yeah, that works much better.
Way, way better. Yeah, we talk about World War I constantly as this changing of the guard of military strategy, and Verdun has to be mentioned in that changing of the guard because it's not necessarily trench warfare that became kind of the hallmark of the Somme, but it also is the heavy artillery that had a pretty big influence on how the Somme was fought.
It's a weird amalgamation of like trench warfare, fortification warfare, artillery being the primary method of doing this, of trying to support troops, and three-quarters of casualties during World War I were due to artillery. So they were just whole hog into this. Here's a little figure that we can kind of wrap up with. So in World War I, the French lost between 1.3 and 1.4 million people. In all of the conflicts that America has had since the Revolutionary War, it's 1.2.
Oh my God.
France lost more in World War I than we have lost in the entirety of modern warfare dating back to the Revolution.
Their history is so much longer.
So that kind of provides, when I try to look at the perspective of like, why did France capitulate so quickly in World War II? It's like, damn, they had just 20 years before lost a shit ton of people, more than we could fathom other than just hearing a number.
Mm-hmm. It does change the lens that I look at France. I'm still not going to be able to bury my preconceived notions that I had before learning all this, but it does paint a little bit different picture of thinking, if I was French and I had to live through the time of World War I and saw how few people came back as to how many people went, I probably wouldn't be super pumped to get geared up for World War II.
It also kind of makes you look at it and say, okay, I can now understand that the whole deal behind the French surrender was a decision made by a certain number of individuals that did not necessarily reflect the will or desire of the French people as a whole. That it wasn't so much a lack of a willingness to fight. It was certain people who had a lack of a willingness that had control over whether they got to fight or not.
The generation that grew up with World War I is now in power facing what the decisions are for World War II.
Yeah, pretty much.
Damn, dude, that's a wild number.
But yeah, longest battle in World War I.
And 303 days. As you were talking about earlier, to think about that, battle's 2 weeks. That was a pretty normal situation. But to know that this thing just kept going, I mean, shit. Sun Tzu took 12 battles over 2 years. And these guys had just one elongated battle for almost an entire year.
Yeah, over just a little bulged area in France.
Yeah, salient.
All right, man. You got anything else?
I think we overdid it.
I like that. I'm not going to say anything else. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll catch you next time.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit him with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.